Because it's sort of an iconic part of our culture, and like my granddad knows about it, my dad knows about it. I mean, it's been going since 1963, and I'm sort of taking that on. That's my responsibility. It's exciting, nerve-wracking, exciting.
So, a little while ago, I made a nearly 4-hour video all about the Peter Capaldi era of Doctor Who, going over the themes and arcs that I think go largely unappreciated, and explaining why I consider it my favourite era of the show. Some people liked it and agreed with the message, other people were wrong, and I got quite a few comments asking if I was going to do similar videos covering different eras of the show. Now, admittedly, I was reluctant at first. That video was purely a passion project, and I didn't want to start half-arsing sequels purely because I thought they might do well. Come on, I'm not Disney. But at some point in July, I started rewatching a lot of the Matt Smith era, before quickly realizing, goddamn, the autism got hands. And here I am, making a sequel. The 11th Doctor era of Doctor Who was the one I grew up with. My first ever episode of the show was The End of Time Part 2, and after thinking, what on earth did I just watch? I promptly fell in love with this long-haired fellow in the bow tie, as he took me on adventures filled with timey-wimey shenanigans, mature explorations of mental health, and fucking nightmare fuel. I absolutely love the 11th Doctor era. It feels like a great progression from what came before it, for reasons you will discover, if you don't go away. Following on from David Tennant was never going to be easy, but I think they did it, and they did it well. And it shows, as Matt Smith's tenure is viewed very fondly by the general public. Although, that being said, whenever I try to introduce people to Doctor Who, more often than not, one of the first things they'll say is, but isn't it, really complicated? And I think that stigma largely exists because of the Smith era. There's no denying there was a massive increase in overarching narratives, and Doctor Who ended up gaining a reputation of being too complicated. Something the writers seem keen on trying to rectify to this day. But was it really too complicated? Or are people just stupid? Was the execution of this era a mess? Or are people just stupid? Is there really recorded evidence of me setting that orphanage on fire? Or are people just stupid? Well, that's what I'm here to discuss. So, grab some popcorn, or jelly babies, or fish fingers and custard, as we look back on the 11th Doctor.
That's it, gather round, roll up, roll up.
By the way, as you've probably noticed, this video is a bit long. Like I say, these are purely passion projects, but if you do enjoy them, then by all means, subscribe. Let's be honest, I'm probably going to end up doing more of these in the future anyway, so yeah, if you want to see more stuff like this, do that, subscribe, and yeah, let's get into it. Our story begins in 2008. The economy is in shambles. Robert Downey Jr. is playing a new character in an upcoming Marvel movie, and David Tennant just reprised his role as Doctor Who the previous year. So, a completely different world to what we have now. But most importantly, Russell T Davies is stepping down as Doctor Who's showrunner. Davies' impact on the show in recent years could not be understated, being the guy who, literally brought it back, and made it a cultural phenomenon once again. Suddenly, the Doctor was this cool action hero inspiring a generation, as he travelled the universe, kissing men, having interracial relationships on board the TARDIS, with adventures full of social and political commentary. Sure, I'm glad none of that stuff happens nowadays, am I right? The main question swirling around everyone's tiny little hindbrain was, who could possibly replace Russell? Who could recapture that lightning in a bottle and continue to inspire a whole new generation? I mean, there have been so many talented writers in this new era. Surely one of them would be willing to take over. What about Paul Cornell? He's written some great episodes so far. Oh well, even if it isn't him, I'm sure he'll stick around to write many more great episodes. Right? Oh, what about Mark Gatiss? He's written so many memorable and outstanding episodes, like... Oh, what about Chris Chibnall? Just kidding, that's never gonna happen, right? Anyway, eventually, it was revealed that Stephen Moffat would be taking over, resulting in thousands of cheers and probably one disembodied voice quietly saying, but I wanted the 42 guy. Stephen Moffat was already a revered writer, having written The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances, which traumatized a generation while simultaneously introducing them to pansexuals. The Girl in the Fireplace, which, imagine the Doctor having a romance with someone he just met. Glad that's never going to happen again. And Blink, which, I mean, it's Blink. With Russell T Davies leaving, David Tennant confirming later on in the year that he was leaving the role, and most of the major production team leaving, the opportunity was there for a completely clean slate. The first time a complete overhaul had happened with the show still on air since Spearhead from Space in 1970. But first, Moffat still had one more story to write under Davis's rule, and knowing his contribution would be viewed as a sign of what's to come, decided to make things count.
Doctor, please tell me you know who I am.
Who are you?
Silence in the Library introduces River Song, a character from the Doctor's future who seemingly knows all about him. Not Donna, though, for some reason. I wonder why. Why? God, why? The story of River Song is clearly very inspired by the Time Traveler's Wife, and Moffat saw one last opportunity for more timey-wimey shenanigans to pique people's interest for what's to come in this upcoming era.
I am the Doctor.
Yeah, someday.
Stephen Moffat was gently lowered from the heavens in Paisley in 1961 with the straightforward intention of systematically creating good television. He mainly started out as a comedy writer, writing sitcoms such as Joking Apart and Chalk. He was also a lifelong Doctor Who fan, and despite the show being off the air for several years at this point, was still eager to get his little Scottish teeth stuck in there. He contributed to the 1995 novel Human Nature, which ended up getting adapted into an actual TV story in 2007, and wrote his own novel, Continuity Errors, in 1996. He then wrote the Doctor Who parody sketch, The Curse of Fatal Death, in 1999, which is genuinely funny, and actually predicted quite a lot of New Who, like the 10th Doctor being the vain, eye-candy one, the 11th Doctor being more shy and childish, the 12th Doctor being the one to turn the Master good, and the 13th Doctor, being blonde. After writing the sitcom Coupling and also writing Jekyll, which exists, he wrote some episodes for Doctor Who, which was so good that he was invited to write more episodes and dictate the episodes that get released. Was this a power he could be trusted with? Or was this a grave error that would... It was good, okay? I like the Moffat era. So, having stepped away from the upcoming live-action reboot of Tintin, which I'm sure upset at least someone, Moffat began crafting his vision for this new era of Doctor Who. One of the most important aspects being the casting of the new Doctor. Following on from the cultural juggernaut of David Tennant's Doctor was gonna be tricky, and many actors were popular choices. A common pick was Patterson Joseph, who you may know as that guy who played the weakest link with Rose in the Series 1 finale and kept going on about his money.
Is anyone listening? Where's my money?
Another choice was James Nesbitt, the main character from Jekyll. Some other popular choices, rather strangely, were John Sim and David Morrissey. Russell Tovey, who appeared in the Christmas special Voyage of the Damned, was a possible candidate, as was James McAvoy, best known for his role of Nomeo in Nomeo and Juliet. I mean, this list is better than what we've had since 2013, with Richard Ayoade still dominating the polls to this day. Look, I say this as someone who likes Richard Ayoade. Please move on. It's not happening. There are better choices out there. Stephen Moffat apparently wanted an older actor to play the Doctor this time around. What he got was the youngest actor to ever play the Doctor.
Mission partially successful?
Matt Smith was 26 when he was cast as the Doctor, and had never watched the show, but made sure to do his homework, catching up with New Who and watching plenty of Classic Who, with second Doctor Patrick Troughton becoming his favourite. He even wrote his own Doctor Who stories in order to better understand the Doctor and how he wanted his interpretation of the character to work. There's no denying, he knew how big of a deal this role was, and was determined to make it count. Matt Smith was officially revealed as the 11th Doctor in January 2009, in an episode of the behind-the-scenes show Doctor Who Confidential. In all honesty, this reveal is kinda strange, especially since it only happens nearly 24 minutes into this 34-minute program. The majority of the episode doesn't really focus on him. It seems like a weird way to announce such a big reveal. But the 11th Doctor was confirmed, and after a lot of Who, production on the new series began. The build-up to Smith's debut was quite eventful. The finale of Series 4 was essentially the culmination of the entire Russell T Davies era of the show, essentially doing Avengers Endgame a decade early, with the Doctor using a regeneration, growing a half-human clone of himself with significantly more Riz, and having to wipe the memories of the only friend he had left at the end. This incarnation, who began so hopeful, has been whittled down time after time, now a grizzled old man just about retaining his sanity. After collabing with the lead singer of the Smiths and meeting the best companion that never was, Lee Evans doing a Welsh accent,
Yes! Fan-fucking-tastic!
the Doctor finally snaps. He decides the laws of time are his to control, and goes completely off the deep end, massively altering the future of the human race. Then, the prophecy of his death seemingly catches up to him, as the Master returns. And then the Time Lords return. And then the Doctor thinks he's avoided his death, but nope. After sacrificing himself to save one ordinary life, one of the most doctory things to do, he goes on a quite lengthy farewell tour before finally regenerating. The new 11th Doctor takes in his surroundings, has a gender identity crisis, and immediately crashes the TARDIS. If that doesn't prepare you for what's to come, I don't know what will. And thus, the 11th Doctor era begins. I think the 11th Hour is about as good of an introduction episode as you can get. Something that I think really matters when it comes to starting a new series, and especially when starting a whole new era, is for the first episode to serve as a statement of intent for what's to come. The 11th Hour is a great statement of intent, not just for Series 5, but for the 11th Doctor's tenure as a whole. There was a lot on the line for this episode, but I think Stephen Moffat cooked. So much is instantly communicated to the audience in this episode. The first shot is the Earth from a distance. A few episodes of the RTD era would start with a similar shot, including the very first episode. So the 11th Hour starting with a shot that's the same but different instantly shows that this is still the same show. That we aren't just going to ignore what came before. Also, shout out to the camera operator who keeps having to get these shots. After the rather explosive new opening titles, we see a big house, with a little girl praying to Santa. You know, I did that once, but then a bunch of marking suddenly appeared on my skin. I wonder why. Oh, this is Amelia Pond, played by Caitlin Blackwood. Fun fact, as of 2024, Caitlin is older now than Karen Gillan was when this episode aired in 2010. Yeah, I know. A big theme of Series 5 is childhood and fairy tales, and that becomes evident here. Amelia is scared of a crack in her bedroom wall, believing she hears voices through it. Weaponizing childhood fears is kind of Moffat's bread and butter when it comes to Doctor Who, and a crack in the wall is such a simple thing to use as a plot point. I mean, I was scared of cracks as a kid. After watching this episode, but the point still stands. But honestly, this crack still creeps me out now. The design is just so good, looking like a crooked smile. It's instantly recognizable. And then, the TARDIS crashes in the garden. And this is where the fairy tale aspect kicks in. There will be so many people who laid awake at night as kids, wishing for the TARDIS to drop into their garden, who longed to escape to a magical universe where all their nightmares and dreams were real. I mean, I still do. Shooty can pick me up anytime he wants. The Doctor starts trying and hating all the food Amelia has to offer him, just like Winnie the Pooh, until he finally settles on fish fingers and custard. This is just such an iconic Doctor moment. I know people who've never watched Doctor Who in their life who reference fish fingers and custard. The 11th Doctor immediately establishes himself as zany and a little bit mad, but he still commands the scene and isn't afraid to take charge and make risky decisions without knowing the outcome, as we see when he investigates the crack. Eventually, the Doctor needs to get back in the TARDIS before it explodes or something, which would never happen, right? And Amelia waits for him. And he comes back. 12 years later. And this is where the episode starts going into meta-commentary, almost breaking the fourth wall and addressing the audience. The Doctor disappeared for over a decade, just like in real life when the show got cancelled. And all the kids who had their lives changed by him, who were inspired by him, who waited for him to come back, grew up. It's quite obvious Moffat loves Doctor Who and always wanted it to come back. There's even a moment in The Curse of Fatal Death where the Doctor's companion begs him to stay alive, and it comes across as Moffat genuinely pleading for the Doctor to come back, as he means so much to so many.
You can't die, you're too nice, too brave, too kind, and far, far too silly. And we all need you, and you simply cannot die.
This is also the show's way of connecting with people who loved the Tennant era, and it tries to get them to give the new Doctor a chance. The Doctor's line of
Believe for 20 minutes.
being directed at the audience as well as Amy. New Who had been going on for 5 years at this point. A whole new generation had taken the show to heart and fell in love with the Doctor all over again. The Davis era matured with its audience, gradually getting darker and more mature, and so many people may have felt like they were outgrowing the show, especially now that everything seemed to be changing. Stephen Moffat is great at putting self-awareness and meta-commentary into his episodes, and his 2 post-regeneration stories are perfect examples of that. He understands the way plenty of people react when changes are made in the show that always changes, and isn't afraid to tackle those attitudes head on. He's a lot more on the nose with it in Deep Breath, but that almost direct addressing of the audience still very much exists here. As for Amy herself, I like the way she's characterized in this episode. Her whole arc in this series is that she never really grew up, despite how much she claims to have. She was never able to properly move on from the Doctor. You can see her immaturity with stuff like her lack of commitment to Rory, reluctant to admit they're even together. And at the end of the episode, she runs away on the night before her wedding, with a man she hardly knows, yet has known her whole life. We learn a lot of the basics of her character here, and there's a lot for future episodes to expand on. The kissogram thing is very 2000s, but it once again fits with her immaturity, how that's her idea of a proper job for grown-up, mature adults. With a lot of introduction episodes like this one, the situation and villain don't have to be anything groundbreaking. The focus should ideally be on the characters, how they interact and deal with dangerous situations, and the 11th Hour is no exception to this. The episode even stops to bring up seemingly insignificant things like the duck pond with no ducks, or when Prisoner Zero gives cryptic hints about the Doctor's future, which I guess they just know. I mean, the Husbands of River Song confirmed that the Doctor does have a reputation among criminals, so, sure. Now, the plot itself is still pretty clever, and there's a good sense of cause to effect, with the Doctor using Prisoner Zero's ability of shapeshifting using other people's minds against it. But then there's the clock scene. Now, I can accept that the Doctor made a virus that uses Wi-Fi to reset every chip in a digital device to 0. But how does that affect non-digital clocks? They're not connected to Wi-Fi or anything? They should not be affected by this? But whatever, it looks cool. And then the Doctor scolds the Atraxi for wanting to burn the planet, saying that he's the one who stops all the invasions, giving them a taste of what he's capable of. If you can look past some of the random footage they used here, like the Cybermen from Pete's World, or the Vashta Narada, or the Ood, this is a really cool scene.
Hello. I'm the Doctor.
Yes, you are.
A lot of people claim each Doctor has a moment, usually early on in their tenure, that they consider to be the moment they accepted this is the Doctor. Personally, I don't have that. They're all the Doctor from the moment they're announced as far as I'm concerned, but this is still a defining moment in solidifying this new incarnation. The 11th Hour is just such a good introduction to the new era. It does a great job of showing how things will be going forward, establishing itself as new and different, but still fundamentally the same show. The big overall plan was for the 11th Doctor's first episode to connect to his last, and the overarching narratives of this era as a whole are set up well here. The main characters of the Doctor, Amy and Rory are well established by the end of the episode. The plot itself is solid and serves well for an introduction episode. Considering how much the 11th Hour had to prove, I think it pulls it off brilliantly. It and Deep Breath being my favourite introduction episodes, primarily because of how well they introduced the new Doctor. But yeah, the 11th Hour still remains an absolute top tier episode for me. I love it. The Beast Below is kinda mid. Okay, this episode has a good premise, and some ideas that work really well. It's just, when you piece the whole thing together... The main purpose of this episode is to prove Amy is worthy of travelling with the Doctor, and continuing the fairy tale vibe while sprinkling in some political commentary. I mean, it delivers on those aspects. They are definitely there. This episode does genuinely have interesting concepts. The whole dystopian police state thing is really cool. There's real potential for a dark, twisted story here, like World Enough in Time. But I think this is an example of Series 5's fairy tale vibe clashing with a mature story it's trying to tell. It's gonna be hard to balance those two attributes simultaneously in the same episode, and so it comes off as a bit disjointed and all over the place. For example, the cold open. This kid is getting dropped into a pit because he doesn't have enough social credit. All the while, a kid is reciting a poem on a screen, while the smiler in the booth puts on a mean face. And then it puts on an even meaner face.
Scaredy cat. Yeah.
And it's just, am I supposed to be scared here? I'm really not sure what the show is going for. Anyway, the Doctor takes Amy into space for the first time, and after getting a view right up her nightie, decides to take her to the 1984 ship. Now, there are some good bits here. I don't mean stuff like how the Doctor inexplicably puts a glass of water on the ground, and it turns out that was him making sure there really weren't any engines running on the ship. I do also like the political commentary of everyone choosing to forget what they've learned and letting the cycle continue.
And once every 5 years, everyone chooses to forget what they've learned. Democracy in action.
Man, who else misses these good old days when Doctor Who wasn't political? The fact that even the Queen is kept in the dark on the Starship Secret is pretty cool.
The Doctor, old drinking buddy of Henry XII, tea and scones with Liz too.
Funnily enough, Matt Smith went on to play Prince Philip, Elizabeth II's husband, in The Crown. Also, I love how the trash-filled wasteland is Lancashire. Like, yeah, God knows where Milton Keynes was. Because this episode needed villains, I guess, we have the Smilers. These things based on Zoltar machines that really don't do much. And then there are these hooded guys who are also part Smiler, just because. I feel like these things had the potential to be creepy, but their goofy expressions and overall lack of threat just makes it hard to take them seriously. Anyway, the episode culminates in a choice for the Doctor. The entire starship is built around the constant torture of the star whale, and the Doctor can either free it, killing everyone on the ship, or lobotomize it, relieving it of pain but leaving it essentially brain dead. This is a really good direction to take the 11th Doctor this early in his life. At this point, the Doctor wanted to move on and forget his past, as he's labelled the man who forgets later on. He subconsciously put on this younger face, each face being younger than the last since the Time War, showing how he just wants to regress, to be young and not have to deal with the hardships of loss and difficult moral decisions. But they always catch up to him in the end. He can feel his frustration, realizing he could never escape this reality. There was also this interaction between the Doctor and Amy earlier in the episode.
Have you ever run away from something because you were scared, or not ready, or just because you could?
Once. A long time ago.
What happened?
Hello.
You could interpret that as the Doctor referring to how he tried running away from death towards the end of his previous incarnation, because he was scared. But it also serves as definitely unintentional foreshadowing to the reflection in the Capaldi era on why the Doctor ran away, as the Doctor says in Heaven Sent that he ran away from Gallifrey because he was scared. But yeah, Amy sees the bigger picture and, having got to know the Doctor, is able to notice the parallels between him and the Star Whale that he didn't pick up on. She realizes all they have to do is stop torturing the whale because they wanted to help anyway. This is a good way of proving Amy is a worthy companion, with her showing inquisitiveness, observationalism, and being willing to take risks, all in the hope of finding the kinder solution. And this makes the Doctor realize he made the right choice in coming back for her. You could also see the constant torture of the Star Whale as a parallel to the Doctor. How he's constantly going through mental anguish saving these humans over and over again, but they keep dying. Overall, I think it's a good ending to this episode. You know, for a while, Stephen Moffat considered this the worst episode he ever wrote for the show. I would not go that far, yet. The Beast Below is definitely a bit all over the place. It has a bunch of ideas, many of which clash with each other, and the overall product comes off as overstuffed and disjointed. But there are good moments, mainly towards the end. I also like the design of the ship. It isn't super futuristic, it feels cobbled together, providing yet more accurate commentary on the UK. So, while I'm not all that crazy about this episode, I like the way it develops the Doctor and Amy's friendship. Still better than Space Babies. Victory of the Daleks is an interesting one. I'm actually a bit of a defender of this episode myself. Granted, the first half is undeniably much better than the second, but I think this episode gets a bit of a bad rep. This was the first Dalek story of the Moffat era, and even though it had been almost 2 years since the airing of Journey's End, there really hadn't been much of a gap since the last appearance of the Daleks. I don't know, I think they might have been in a bit of a rush to bring them back, especially since this was the last Dalek episode until Series 7 2.5 years later. The main goal of this episode was to reinvent the Daleks, to move on from the now complete arc of the Davis era. Now, I really like the premise of this episode. The Daleks are pretending to be robots created to help Britain fight the bad guys in World War II. Oh hey, I've got that poster. This is a cool homage to Power of the Daleks, where they also pretended to be servants. The Daleks even repeat the line, "I am your soldier," a reference to a similar line used by the Daleks in that 60s episode.
I am your servant.
The Daleks also originally being based on the World War II bad guys represents how they're fighting against their roots in this episode, trying to move on and adapt to a universe that's driven them to near extinction over and over. Now, for one of the main problems with this episode. Why is the Doctor friends with Winston Churchill? Now, he was good at leading the country during the war, there's no denying that, but he had many opinions and did many things, a lot of which I probably can't show in this video, but here are some articles if you want to learn about this stuff yourself. Ian McNeice does a great job at playing the character, but Churchill in this episode just feels so simplified. All the nuance and controversiality removed. Lots of his general dialogue sounding like his iconic speeches, so he can be the golden wartime hero the British public are led to believe he was. Which I imagine is why he is the way he is in this episode. I doubt Mark Gatiss or Stephen Moffat even knew the full extent of his horrifying attitudes. And it's not like the Doctor's pretending to be mates with him and slagging him off behind his back, like with Richard Nixon. No, the Doctor is actively mates with Churchill, and has visited him in at least 2 other regenerations. So I guess whenever they hang out, the Doctor just has to stick his fingers in his ears when Churchill starts giving his opinions on Indians and Jews. That aside, I really like the setting for this episode. There have been episodes set during World War II before, but they'd never really involved the up-close and personal combat and strategizing that went on during the war. So this episode being set in the Cabinet War Rooms is really cool. Now, the highlight of this episode. Matt Smith. Okay, that applies to every episode he's in, but still. His performance, particularly in the first part of this episode, is mesmerizing. He does such a fantastic job at portraying the sheer, unfiltered disdain the Doctor has towards the Daleks. How he was so sure they were gone for good, but they never die, while he loses everyone and everything. Another example of the Doctor being frustrated at how he just can't seem to move on from his past. You could even see this Dalek struggling to look him in the eye, its gun twitching as he attacks it, fighting the urge to kill. I adore moments like this, where the Doctor just completely snaps and shows the unfiltered rage that lurks beneath the surface. I get why the more recent Doctors don't have as many moments like this, because they've grown and moved on from the trauma of the Time War, but it's something that I think has been sorely missing from the character in recent years. I am deeply sorry for playing footage from the Idiot's Lantern here, and then comes the big reveal of the Daleks' master plan. Wait a minute, these Daleks are the last survivors after Dr. Riz blew them all up. There's also one progenitor left, a device containing pure Dalek DNA that can create more Daleks. Only problem is, it won't listen to these Daleks, as it considers them impure. I really like this. It's a great use of the overall narrative of the Daleks in the RTD era, how they do anything to survive, turning dead humans into Daleks, or Davros creating them from his own cells. But, ironically enough, for a race hell-bent on genetic purity, their own impurity has come back to bite them. So, they insert themselves into a part of history where they're likely to be noticed, and wait for the Doctor to show up and help them bring their race back. I like that, though I do find it a bit silly that their only way of getting the progenitor to accept them was for the Doctor to say, "You're a Dalek." Anyway, the Doctor goes onto their ship. Apparently this is one of the same ships from the Series 4 finale. Looking past how this just does not look like any of the Dalek ships in the Davis era, this does not look alien or intimidating at all.
It's like a
spaceship.
kitchen.
But the Doctor pretending a jammy dodger is a TARDIS self-destruct button is genuinely funny, and something I could see pretty much any other Doctor doing. So, with the Doctor's testimony in place, the Daleks are able to produce new Daleks, and we're introduced to the Paradigm Daleks. These were based on the Daleks from the 1960s Peter Cushing movies, and people really didn't like them. Many Power Rangers and Teletubbies jokes have been thrown around, and in all honesty, I actually kind of like them. I mean, not gonna lie, they're kind of cheeked up. I'm of the opinion that the world simply wasn't ready for the Paradigm Daleks yet. Apparently the plan was for their butts to be able to open up, allowing them to switch weapons and stuff, which is why they're so caked. But yeah, immense backlash meant these bubble butts didn't play much of a role in the show after this episode, as the Bronze Daleks became the norm once more. It's a shame, really. I think the Paradigm had potential to be the new Cult of Skaro, and I would have liked to see what else they were going to do, but oh well. Another really cool part of this episode is Bracewell, a scientist who believes he created the Daleks. Bracewell has his entire sense of self just thrown out the window. Wait, no, they're in the Cabinet War Rooms. Thrown out the space plane. Characters finding out they're just inventions isn't anything new in this show, but this is still cool, albeit slightly underexplored. But Amy, once again, takes initiative, realizing they could use Bracewell's genius and inventiveness, which the Daleks gave him, against them. The episode suddenly becomes Star Wars at this point, and it's very goofy and random, but I like it. The Doctor is then given an impossible choice. He can either stop the Daleks or let them escape while he saves the Earth. This is very similar to moral dilemmas he's dealt with when facing the Daleks in the past, and it's obvious which choice he's going to make. But Amy, once again, takes initiative, reminding Bracewell of his humanity. I don't know, it's a very Moffat-y conclusion. Even though the Doctor saved the Earth, he's filled with dread at the implications of the Daleks surviving with a device that can create infinitely more Daleks. But Amy reminds him that it's important to celebrate the victories as they come, further showing why she's a good influence on the Doctor, and why he still needs someone with him. This episode reminds you of the series arc really well too, as Amy doesn't remember the previous Dalek invasions of Earth. Wait, this plot point lingering as the leitmotif we associate with the crack plays makes this moment really unsettling. How does Amy not remember the planets in the sky? That's not something you just forget. It really sells the idea that there's something big going on here. So yeah, Victory of the Daleks has its flaws, once again due to many of its aspects being underdeveloped. But I do find myself enjoying it overall. I like the way it continues developing Amy's character. I absolutely love the Doctor's attitude towards the Daleks, particularly in the beginning. Overall, not a bad resurrection of the Daleks. Wait, next up is The Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone. A very eventful and interesting story that I really enjoy. This episode brings back the Weeping Angels from the fan-favourite Series 3 episode Blink. The plan was for this story to be a sequel in the way Aliens is a sequel to Alien. A lot more action-packed, with guns and forests and shit. I mean, the Weeping Angels are iconic, so it makes sense why Moffat would want to bring back his golden boys. But on top of that, we also see the return of River Song, the woman from the Library two-parter in Series 4. Now, eagle-eyed viewers may pick up on the fact that this is a slightly younger version of River Song, mainly because she's not dead. I'll talk more about this later, but the way we see River's character development throughout her time in the show is really interesting to me. We essentially see her character arc in reverse, starting at the end and gradually going backwards. It makes for an interesting perspective, as we learn more about River in this episode, but we're essentially learning her backstory in real time. I don't know, it's just a really cool way of expanding on her character. Also, goddamn, I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but for someone so eager for a fresh start, the 11th Doctor just could not escape his past in the early days. Alright, please tell me I'm not the only one who thought this scene was set in a cave and was genuinely shocked to find out it's the same beach, just at night. Now, the scene of Amy being trapped with the Weeping Angel slowly coming out of the screen is really tense. I also like how it addresses a quote-unquote plot hole some people pointed out, that you could just close one eye at a time to keep an angel frozen. I'm sorry, but I've always found that idea stupid. Have you ever actually tried doing that? I'd argue it's more painful than just not blinking. But there's another lore drop in this scene that I'm not too crazy about. The image of an angel becomes itself an angel. I mean, yeah, it makes for a cool scene here, but this just leaves a lot of plot holes. So, all those photos Sally has of the angels, aren't they gonna come to life? How about the Statue of Liberty? How many photos of that are out there? Also, apparently looking an angel in the eyes allows it to possess your mind. Once again, a cool concept, executed well in this story, but raises more questions than it answers. Unless that angel that stared down Larry was just playing the long game for over a year. Now, I'm sure you can come up with your own headcanons for these things. That's cool and all, but I think the overstuffing of random new Weeping Angel lore after their first episode kinda hurt them in the long run. One of the main things that made the angels so iconic was how easy it was to understand their logic, and the new concepts introduced in this story, interesting though they may be, kinda detract from that. That aside, I love the atmosphere in this episode. The dark catacombs are really creepy and claustrophobic, and the twist of all the Aplan statues being angels is really good. Mainly because it's right there and yet you probably don't even notice. Some of my favourite moments in this episode are when the Doctor is confronted with the reality of the death that follows him. Stuff like this moment with Father Octavian.
Sorry, but there's no way we could have rescued you.
And when you've flown away in your little blue box, I'll explain that to their families.
Or when the angels are taunting the Doctor over the death of Bob.
You told me my fear would keep me alive, but I died afraid, in pain and alone. You made me trust you, and when it mattered, you let me down.
Faith is a pretty strong theme in this episode, be it the cleric's faith in their religion, or everyone's faith in the Doctor, who tries not to lose faith in himself. And the episode ends with a literal leap of faith, which is a really cool moment. Oh hey, Over the Rainbow is on next. Now, I remember Flesh and Stone getting a bit of negativity back in the day, people calling it an underwhelming second part. But I disagree, so here is why my opinion is better than yours. So, The Time of Angels did a good job of establishing the angels as creepy and a proper threat. Now, what if you were to follow that up by introducing a whole other threat so massive it scares the original threat away? Well, enter Big Crack. The Doctor finally becomes aware of the crack that's following him and Amy. This is the power source the angels wanted to feast on, but they underestimated just how powerful the crack is, and now are running as fast as their little angel legs will let them. It's not like the angels are completely sidelined in the episode either. They still play a significant part in the plot and its ending. A great example is this scene. I love this scene. The Doctor and Octavian may not have seen eye to eye throughout this adventure, but they share one final interaction just before Octavian dies, and I love the way it's executed. Their final lines of,
"I wish I'd known you better."
I think so. You know me at my best.
Are so good, and you could feel the pain in the Doctor's eyes, knowing he's sending this guy to his death. We also finally learn a bit more about the crack here. It was caused by an explosion, and the energy spilling from it can erase you from existence completely. Oh, so that's what the Mandela effect is. But yeah, this is communicated to the audience really well, with all the soldiers going off one by one, and them not even remembering each other. As well as finally explaining stuff like the duck pond with no ducks, and why Amy didn't remember the Daleks. As well as explaining why a giant Cyber King walking across Victorian London isn't a particularly well-documented part of history. Which also implies the crack may have actually been following the Doctor since before the 11th hour. Now, Amy doesn't have a great time in this episode either. That angel that she had a staring contest with is now killing her from inside her own mind. Sore loser. And so she spends most of the episode essentially blind. What is it with Moffat and making his Scottish characters unable to see? It does make for some good tension, especially when she's walking blindly. Once again, the Doctor's faith is challenged here, as everyone keeps dying around him due to something he can't understand, all while he faces an army of monsters he can't defeat. But his faith in himself is restored when he closes the crack by stuffing it with angels. Wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. It's another cool moment, even if they spell Mavity wrong for some reason. Alright, I can't lie, there are two scenes in this episode I really don't like. First, this scene. I've spoken about this before, but I really don't like seeing the angels move like this. The whole point of them is they're only statues when you see them, which implies they turn into something else when unobserved. And that true form being left to your imagination is great. Also, there have been times where the angels aren't moving while the audience is watching them, even if no one in the show is watching them. which adds a whole other level of immersion for the viewer, feeling like they have control over the angels. But that gets thrown out the window here. Other people have tried to explain it as it just looking like they're moving because the lights in the forest are flickering at an incomprehensibly fast speed, or that Amy was just imagining it, but it still frustrates me to watch. And, of course, this scene. Now, Moffat has gone on record to say that he regrets writing this scene the way he did. I'm okay with this scene in concept. Amy makes unwanted advances towards the Doctor on the night before her wedding, and he realizes she needs to spend more time with Rory to properly understand the commitment she's making. It's a good way of introducing Rory into the dynamic while bringing things back to Amy's immaturity and her infatuation with the Doctor. The scene has narrative purpose, it's not just there to be there, which elevates it slightly, but there are some noticeable problematic undertones here. Fun fact, the Doctor's action of miming a big nose to describe Rory was improvised by Matt. This episode was filmed before the 11th hour, and so Arthur Darvill hadn't been part of filming yet. But Matt and Arthur were already friends, and so we snuck that gesture in. If that isn't true friendship, I don't know what is. The Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone is a proper mint story. It's very ambitious, and considering how much it has to juggle, especially in the second part, I think it works really well. It expands on previous mysteries like the Crack and River Song. I really like the dynamics between the characters. The angels are actually pretty scary. It's just a well-structured adventure, aside from a couple of dodgy scenes. This leads into The Vampires of Venice, an episode which exists. It definitely happened. This episode was written by Toby Whithouse, who I think has a pretty good track record when it comes to writing Doctor Who. I mean, 3 of his 6 writing credits are incredibly good. 1 is good, and the other 2 were Now, the main point of this episode is that the Doctor wants Amy and Rory to spend some time together, and this is actually some good long-term character development for the Doctor. Back in Series 1, he took Rose on adventures with him, which ended up ruining her relationship with her boyfriend Mickey. And the Doctor seems keen to not let that happen again, so Rory gets added to the TARDIS team full-time. I really like Rory. He would be a contender for Best Companion of all time. Unfortunately, not all exists. Rory adds an interesting dynamic to the TARDIS team. He's not infatuated with the Doctor like Amy is, and so he's not afraid to call him out on his reckless behaviour. Rory brings a fresh pair of eyes to the adventures of the Doctor and Amy, as we realise Amy is becoming reckless and overconfident like the Doctor. Rory isn't particularly keen on travelling in the TARDIS, but joins in anyway because it's what Amy wants. And so, Amy ends up having to choose between her 2 lives, which we'll come back to in a minute. So, that's the good bits out the way. Now for the rest of the episode. This episode is about fish vampires in Venice. Because, you know, the planet was destroyed by the cracks in time, and only some of the male population survived. So, they have to get women and turn them into fish vampires. Because, you know.
Pale, creepy girls who don't like sunlight.
OMG, literally me. Now, I get this episode has themes of romance and love and stuff, but that does not justify the borderline incestuous relationship this guy has with his mum. That, coupled with him roaming the streets, finding women to bite, there is a Netflix documentary about this guy just waiting to be made.
Something happens in there. Something evil.
Venetians, when the school known for taking girls away and never letting you see them again, takes your daughter away and never lets you see her again. Oh no, Isabella can't escape because of the sunlight. Now let's sentence her to execution in this courtyard that's clearly in broad daylight. Oh well, Isabella is dead now. What a shame, she had such an impact on the plot. I wonder how her father will react. Oh, he just immediately blows up. Yeah, the side characters in this episode aren't great. They don't have much, well, character, and they just die when the episode needs them to. Now, Rosanna Calvieri wants her species to stay alive. You'd think the Doctor would empathize with that. Obviously, the way they're going about restoring their species is wrong, but you'd think the Doctor would offer some help. Rosanna literally asks the Doctor for help, and he turns her down. You mean to tell me he couldn't have taken them to some other world? There's no other world out there where they can rebuild.
A partnership. Any which way you choose.
I will tear down the house of Calvieri stone by stone.
Yeah, this is incredibly weird from the Doctor. Remember when he literally offered to help the last Dalek in the universe? But no, I guess the fish vampires don't deserve help because Rosanna didn't know Isabella's name. Because, I'm sure Dalek Khan remembered the name of everyone he slaughtered for the hell of it. So yeah, bad episode, good way of continuing the Series 5 dynamic and kickstarting the next part of Amy's arc. That's about it. Oh boy, old people! Alright, episode 7 is Amy's Choice, and I love this episode. Amy's Choice takes a step back from the action-packed, incest-filled vibe of the series so far to give us more of a character piece. With Amy now fully established as a character and Rory now part of the dynamic, this episode focuses on Amy's moral dilemma of the series, as she has two lives that can't really coexist, and now they properly clash. The three of them are stuck alternating between two realities. The Doctor's ideal reality, in the TARDIS with his friends, with some danger and a mystery to solve, and Rory's ideal reality, with him and Amy settled down in a quaint village, happily married, with a baby on the way. And Amy is caught between the two, now being forced to see the potential futures that lie ahead depending on which choice she makes. One of these worlds is a dream, and it's up to them to find out which one. But they're both so realistic. They all have their own memories of the locations as if they've always been there.
Mr. Navy ran the sweet shop. He used to slip me the odd free toffee.
This is all being caused by the Dream Lord, something with no actual physical presence, and yet he has all the presence. I love this character. Toby Jones does such a brilliant job in the role, matching the Doctor's confidence and particularly putting a dark twist on the 11th Doctor's personality. I love the way he taunts the trio, knowing how to bother them and keep them on edge. The interactions between the Doctor and the Dream Lord are so good, and the fact that the Dream Lord is an amalgamation of the Doctor's dark side adds a whole other layer of nuance to their relationship, with the Doctor outright admitting no one hates him as much as he hates himself. There's also a good scene where Amy is alone with the Dream Lord, and he makes her doubt the Doctor, clouding this idealized view she has of him. For Amy, this episode isn't so much about picking which life is the dream, but rather picking which one she has to commit to. This episode is a really great turning point for Amy's character arc in Series 5, and scenes like this narrate that change really well. A lot of people ask for the Dream Lord to come back, and as cool as that would be, I think he definitely works best as a one-off villain. He fits perfectly into this narrative for this series and arc, and he's just the evil side of the Doctor, so there's not much more that can be done with him. In the Ledwith dream, Amy and Rory are settled in a house, in a village of old people. But the old people are aliens! The whole old people thing could represent Amy's fear of mundanity and growing old, a clear part of her character in this series.
We have to grow up eventually.
Says who?
Towards the end, Rory dies to one of the Echnidines, and it hits Amy hard. She spent this whole series running away from her marriage, not properly committing to Rory, or appreciating the fact that she'd had him in her life, until he was gone. It's a real moment of clarity and maturity from Amy, as she realises life isn't just a fairy tale where she can get whisked away and have fun adventures. There are going to be Torchwood spoilers in approximately 5 seconds, so skip ahead if you want to avoid those spoilers. This reminds me of the Series 1 finale of Torchwood, where Gwen doesn't appreciate what she had in her boyfriend, Rhys, until he was killed. Gwen and Amy even say similar lines to the person they believed could save them from the mundanity and inevitability of everyday life.
Save him? That's what you do?
No ways.
Then what is the point of you? You bring him back.
No.
There's got to be something that you can do, otherwise what's the fucking point of you?
Amy decides she can't live in a world without Rory, and wants to die in this world. It's certain it has to be the dream, and I love the final look the Doctor and the Dream Lord give each other here. But then it turns out both realities were fake, and the Doctor blows up the TARDIS to kill them all again. Damn, blowing up the TARDIS? That's quite extreme. I'm glad that's never going to happen again. The whole dream within a dream thing could be cheap and unsatisfying, but this episode handles it well. The Doctor knowing this choice was too obvious to be real because he knows the Dream Lord. It also doesn't undermine the weight of Amy choosing Rory at the end, so I like it. Amy's Choice is a great episode. It's a fantastic character piece that puts Amy's character and ideals into perspective, while putting the trio in a disorienting and confusing scenario, all topped off with the brilliant Dream Lord. It has tension, it has emotional value, and it's a really impactful episode in the Series 5 narrative. Easily one of my favourites of the series. This is followed up with The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, which... This episode brings back the Silurians, a reptilian race who owned the planet before humans. The thing is, the Silurians don't really have much of a purpose or motivation outside of their first appearance. There's not much else you can do with them as a whole, and that shows here. The plot of this story is very similar to the plot of the Silurians' first appearance in 1970. The Silurians come to the surface after scientists drill into their home. The Doctor tries to act as a middleman between humans and Silurians. A rogue batch of Silurians try and radicalize the other Silurians, and they try to attack the humans. You can see the similarities. Now, I'm not opposed to Doctor Who writers being inspired by previous episodes, or even adapting old media. I mean, look at Human Nature, which I mentioned at the start of the video, or The Star Beast, or Rise of the Cybermen, or Dalek. But when you're just reusing the same plot as a previous episode, about the same villains, it comes off as cheap. Now, the Silurians themselves, I get why you'd want to update their design. Like, their classic design does look a little dated by modern standards. But surely they could have done more than just make them look like green, scaly humans. The design is good and smooth, but there's a real lack of imagination here compared to the original Silurians. Like, what if their faces looked like these cool masks they wear? Like, that would have been really good. But as a whole, their modern design just feels so uninspired. So, this episode is set in 2020. I do see a lot of people questioning where COVID is in this story. I mean, the real-life explanation for this is obvious, but COVID has never actually been mentioned in the main show, only expanded media, so whether COVID is canon in Doctor Who or not depends on how often you touch grass. Speaking of which, we never got bluegrass either. Because of woke. Now, the first scene with the Doctor, Amy and Rory is a bit weird. Apparently they were going to Rio, while wearing jackets, and then they see their future selves. Now, I don't have a problem with this being a different future for Amy and Rory than the one we know. You know, time is in flux, things can change. I just don't get why they do this. Like, wow, their lives must be really boring if they travelled all this way to see their past selves for a few seconds. And then Rory tells Amy to leave her wedding ring behind. All this stuff feels kinda forced, like, oh no, Rory, I hope nothing bad happens to you.
What do you want? I always come back. No!
But yeah, Rory does have more of a proper companion presence in this story, as Amy spends most of it captured, which is a good way of elevating him beyond the occasional comic relief. The Doctor also has some really good moments in this episode.
I'm the last of my species.
You're really not, because I'm the last of my species, and I know how it sits in a heart.
So don't insult me.
Not monsters, not evil. I mean, well, only as evil as you are. Nobody gets harmed. We can land this together. If you are the best you can be.
But then he also has this.
I left my headphones at home.
I'm sorry, but I just don't believe the Doctor would be this reckless with a child's safety over a pair of headphones. I get why a child would have that stupid thinking, even if Elliot had been portrayed as a pretty smart kid, but there is an unknown and clearly intelligent and dangerous threat coming to the surface any minute, and they've already taken Amy. Why is the Doctor so cool with Elliot taking such an unnecessary risk? Is he stupid? And I don't know, a lot of the dialogue in this story just feels unnatural? It's not horrendous, but there were a few times where things just felt really stunted.
I wonder where this leads.
Maybe it's a way out of here.
And on that note, I find it hard to care about pretty much any of these side characters. Like, at best, they're just kind of bland, and then you've got Karen, I mean Ambrose. The thing is, I don't think we're supposed to fully despise this character. The episode tries to get you to at least understand her motivations, but there's just not enough of a nuanced character for that to happen. So she just comes off as insufferable.
I'm a nurse, you should have told me.
You say that like he was supposed to know. So eventually, the humans and Silurians begin debating as to whether they can share the planet. Obviously, things weren't going to work out, especially considering this episode is set in the very near future, and the show tries to maintain some level of realism to the time we currently live in. But we end up getting told the Silurians will try and come out again in 1,000 years. And we just never see that future. or what it entails. It just makes this whole story seem like a waste of time, as the actual interesting part of this story is just abandoned and left for some future writer to pick up if they feel like it. I do like the chase scene that happens as a result of things breaking down. It adds some action into this otherwise very dull episode. Although, there is a countdown that's very shoehorned in just to get things to finally happen. Wait, who wrote this again? Oh, that makes sense. The bit where Tony leaves his family is actually done pretty well. I think I might actually feel something watching this if these characters were interesting. And then, we get to this scene. I actually love this scene. The Crack spawns in and eats Rory after he gets shot by a Silurian. And he dies saving the Doctor, showing how he was growing to like and care about him more. But he dies, and as we learned in Flesh and Stone, the time energy from the Crack will erase him from existence. And the execution of this is so good. Amy being dragged kicking and screaming into the TARDIS, the Doctor telling her to keep thinking of Rory as it's the only way to keep him alive. Everything about this, the performances, the music, this is such a powerful, heartbreaking scene, and it does not deserve to be attached to an episode this dull. This scene fully delivers the weight of this moment, and it's fantastic. I do kinda like the final interaction between the Doctor and Ambrose, how he acknowledges that Ambrose acted wrongly, but doesn't let that ruin his perception of humanity, or how they can truly be better. The same message he was trying so hard to push to the Silurians, and it would have been easy to forget, but he doesn't. And then the episode ends with some ominous foreshadowing, as he discovers he picked up a piece of the TARDIS from the Crack. So overall, these two episodes are a very big, stinky mess, with a really good ending that doesn't really elevate the rest of the story at all, due to being completely disconnected from it. Outside of that scene, the episodes are filled with dodgy dialogue, bland or downright hateable characters, a muddled, unoriginal plot that doesn't really do anything, and questionable pacing. I think the ending is the only thing stopping this two-parter from being a completely bland, boring mess. You know, there's definitely one guy watching this right now who adores these episodes. I'm sorry to that one guy. Please don't kill me and then try and blame me for my own murder. Thanks. Oh boy, we are so fucking back. Vincent and the Doctor is a masterpiece. This episode was written by Richard Curtis, who wasn't really a Doctor Who fan, but was eager to write something involving Vincent van Gogh. This episode serves as a tribute to Van Gogh, as well as a tribute to Curtis's sister, who he lost to suicide. As such, this episode serves as a mature commentary on depression, and it handles this topic sensitively and beautifully. So, firstly, Vincent himself. They could not have got a better actor to play him. Tony Curran does a fantastic job bringing the character to life, genuinely making you believe this is the real Van Gogh. Vincent in this episode is eccentric and nuanced, clearly struggling with his mental health while still finding beauty and joy in the world, despite how much it keeps tearing him down. Vincent's mood is kinda inconsistent throughout the episode. At first, he's happy to find people who don't immediately hate or ostracize him, but then he finds out they're just gonna leave, and it breaks him. Depression is a fragile and unpredictable thing. Someone with depression could be happy one moment and inconsolable the next. Just because someone with depression is happy for a time doesn't mean those feelings aren't still lingering, and I like that the episode handles this in a realistic way. The Doctor's line of
"Then I promise you we'll be out for your hair by this time tomorrow"
is kind of insensitive, assuming Vincent wants to be alone, but it just further shows how fragile depression is, how one wrong action can send a person spiraling. Speaking of the Doctor, the inclusion of this episode at this point in the show is very fitting. This is a Doctor who's eager to run away from his own sadness and guilt, so for him to have to directly deal with depression is a really good direction to take this more whimsical Doctor. A topic as real and impactful as depression actively contradicts the fairy tale vibe of Series 5, but does it in such a good way that it doesn't feel jarring. Similar to the Doctor, Amy is also dealing with her own sadness, except she doesn't even know why she's sad. This is briefly acknowledged in the episode, but it's a solid reminder that Rory's death isn't just going to be forgotten. The villain of the episode is the Crephaeus, a monster that only Vincent can see. There's a really dumb rumor I see sometimes that the Crephaeus was only added into the episode because Stephen Moffat thought there should be a monster, which has been debunked by the man himself, and doesn't even make sense. Like, the Crephaeus is clearly a significant part of the plot. So, you've got this invisible monster, and only Vincent can see it. A brilliant metaphor for his depression. Others may act like they can see and understand it, but the truth is, nobody understands a person's depression better than the person themselves. The Doctor can use all his gadgets, but Vincent is the only one who can truly comprehend this thing. The use of the Crephaeus also shows how depression can be misunderstood by others. The episode begins with the Doctor seeing the Crephaeus in one of Van Gogh's paintings, and he describes it as evil. But it turns out at the end that the Crephaeus was lashing out because it felt alone and scared. They misunderstood something they couldn't properly understand, acted rashly, and drove a living being to death. The scene following the death of the Crephaeus is beautiful. Vincent brings his thought process to life vividly, taking something as ordinary as the night sky and illustrating the power and magic that he sees, as the dull, cloudy sky morphs into starry night. It shows the genius and whimsy of Van Gogh, taking the pain of his everyday life and combining it with his meticulous observation of the world around him, and sculpting an awe-inspiring vision of the world.
We have fought monsters together and we have won. On my own, I fear I may not do as well.
God, I find this line so powerful. Alright, you know what scene is up next. The Doctor decides to take Vincent to a museum in the present day, and he sees just how beloved his work is. This magnificently talented artist who died alone, believing he was unloved and worthless, sees how adored he is by countless people. Those works that he convinced himself were awful, worth nothing, hung up for the world to adore, as the Doctor gets Bill Nye to explain what he thinks made Vincent's work so admirable and noteworthy. It's such a powerful scene. And like the Doctor's Zygon speech, there's a reason it gets to the top of the Doctor Who subreddit every other week. Tony Curran once again brings the character to life, genuinely making you think Van Gogh got to see the longevity of his passion. Amy ends up really excited because of this, believing they've given Vincent a whole new lease of life, saving him from his suicide a year after they met him. But nothing has changed. Even Vincent believed that this glimpse into the future was the start of a new chapter in his life. But depression doesn't work like that. And in a shot mirroring Vincent's surprise at the museum, Amy is surprised by the lack of new paintings. Vincent still took his own life a year later. Amy is, of course, saddened by this, believing they didn't make a difference, but the Doctor comforts her with this amazing message.
Every life is a pile of good things and bad things. The good things don't always soften the bad things, but vice versa. The bad things don't necessarily spoil the good things or make them unimportant.
They may not have been able to cure Vincent's depression, but they gave him something to be happy about. One extra thing to keep him going. They still made a difference to his tragically short life. It's another accurate and powerful message, and a beautiful, bittersweet ending to the episode. Vincent and the Doctor is fantastic. It's a slower episode that handles its themes in an accurate and mature way, serving as an inspiring and moving tribute to Van Gogh. The way it brings his thoughts and emotions to life is incredible. This episode is an absolute highlight, not just of the Matt Smith era, but of the show as a whole. Now, what better way to follow this masterpiece up than with Brainrot James Corden episode? Honestly, I don't know what you expect me to say about this episode. It's fine for what it is, and it's written by Gareth Roberts and stars James Corden, so make of that what you will. Anyway, and with that, we head into the series finale. Finally, the mystery of the crack will be solved. Sort of. Series finales in the RTD era were always pretty extravagant, with each finale getting bigger and grander than the last, resulting in universe-ending stakes by the end. This finale continues that trend, sending the stakes higher than ever before. The Pandorica Opens and the Big Bang feel like an indication of where the show was going at this point. There had been series arcs, little hints towards the finale sprinkled throughout the episodes, but the finales always felt like their own thing. Here though, the series arcs of the cracks and the silence connect to the finale in a much stronger way, feeling like puzzle pieces fitting together. Something we hadn't really seen thus far, at least not to this degree, showing how the Smith era was going for a more serialized approach. You can see that in the beginning, with the cold open showing us some of the places and characters we've seen throughout the series, like Churchill, Liz 10, Van Gogh, and how the revisiting of these locations is all part of a wider narrative, getting River Song and the painting to the right place at the right time for the Doctor. I also like the scene of River looking for time travel, like it's the 51st century equivalent of some underground drug ring. It gives me a Star Wars vibe, which was apparently intentional, as River's clothes in the rest of the episode were inspired by Princess Leia and Han Solo, respectively. According to Vincent's vision, this painting of the TARDIS exploding is something to do with Stonehenge. I like the idea that there's something hidden beneath Stonehenge, the origin of which is an iconic mystery. So it makes sense that Doctor Who would take that mystery and give a wild sci-fi explanation for the structure existing. They also managed to get permission to actually film at Stonehenge for one night, which is pretty cool. The area beneath Stonehenge is really creepy. It's a very tense atmosphere. And so, they find the Pandorica, which the Doctor had dismissed as a fairy tale. The Doctor tells the tale of the Pandorica, how there was a nameless warrior soaked in the blood of a billion galaxies that was tricked and trapped inside this box. This nameless monster turns out to be the Doctor, establishing him as the villain of this fairy tale, a contrast to the series so far. But this does fit with the Doctor's legendary status across the universe, and how many species may come to think of him. We've seen before how the Doctor can unintentionally make things worse, to the point where he ended his previous life full of regret, because nobody could reason with him. We also end up seeing more of this warrior reputation in Series 6, which I'll get to in a bit.
You know how sometimes I have really brilliant ideas? Sorry.
I genuinely quote this all the time. But yeah, Amy gets attacked by a Cyberman head, and there's some really cool and unsettling imagery here. Probably the best use of the Cybermen in the 11th Doctor era. But apparently the robot suit itself is alive and looking for humans to convert, which I don't really get. I was always under the assumption that Cybermen at their core are people, and the suit can't function without a brain inside. But if the robot part can function just fine, then what's the point in upgrading people, when you could just have an army of robot suits with no risk of their emotions coming back or anything?
Rory, I'm not trying to be rude, but you died.
This is exactly how the average British person would act if you came back from the dead. So, Rory comes back after being erased from existence, further showing how he is literally the most Giga Chad person ever and the peak of male performance. God, I love this man. The Doctor then gives a big speech to the thousands upon thousands of aliens. It's a really good and iconic 11th Doctor moment, though it doesn't hit me as much as it seems to with plenty of others. But it also further shows the Doctor's vanity, how he puts himself in the hero role once again, assuming they're all here for whatever may be in the Pandorica. It adds to the unreasonableness of the unnamed warrior in the fairy tale, and hints at how the Doctor's bravado and legendary heroic status is about to be turned on its head. It's at this point the TARDIS gets hijacked and taken to the 26th of June 2010, the date of the explosion that caused all the cracks. I'm sure that doesn't mean anything. River goes inside Amy's abandoned house using her Game Boy to scan for alien tech. This scene is so ominous and tense. It feels right out of a horror movie, like I'm expecting a jump scare at any moment. Tiny bit of a plot hole though. Why is River surprised at all the drawings Amy did of the Doctor when they literally grew up together? Like, we know for a fact she knew about this stuff already. Also, quick side note, I know the BBC really had to reach into the back of their costume cupboard and pick out the 12 costumes they have. But that being said, why are the Weevils there? If you've seen Torchwood, you know what I'm talking about. How and why are they here? The final few minutes of this episode are absolute peak. The tension builds as we realise the whole episode has been a trap. The Doctor isn't the hero stopping whatever waits inside the box. He is the imp of the Pandorica. With Rory grieving over his accidental murder of Amy and River trapped in the exploding TARDIS, the Doctor is trapped in the Pandorica by the Alliance, believing they're saving the universe. The way the Doctor begs for them to listen, the camera zooming out to orbit the Earth, the entire universe fading away before our eyes. And then the music cuts out. Silence truly falls as the Earth drifts into the void. The Pandorica Opens is a magnificent opening to the finale. It's tense, it ties a lot of the series thus far into the finale, It has a brilliant twist that subverts the Doctor's fairy tale hero status. And that cliffhanger is so good. Things have truly never felt more hopeless, and you're left wondering how something this catastrophic could be undone. Well, the Doctor saves the day by taking the crack walkies through all of time, undoing all of the death. And then we learn that the silence was just the nickname of that old woman from the 11th Hour, and the concept of the silence was only important because we believed it was important. Okay, no. There's a lot of pressure on the Big Bang here. With a cliffhanger that massive and pessimistic, it really has to deliver a satisfying conclusion to this finale, while ending the series as a whole on a positive note. The episode begins with the opening scene from the 11th Hour, except the TARDIS doesn't crash into Amelia's garden. The Doctor never shows up. Not only that, but there are no stars in the sky. It's made clear early on that this timeline is very off.
Okay, kid, this is where it gets complicated.
Yeah, this is basically a fourth wall break. Things do not get any easier from this episode on. A lot of this episode relies on what are essentially bootstrap paradoxes, with stuff like how the Doctor gets out of the Pandorica thanks to help from his future self, who got help from his future self, and so on. I know some people might consider this cheap, but shut up. No, but actually, this episode is all about faith in the impossible, and there's not really a universe to contradict with this logic, so I'm chill with it. Then, Rory decides to wait and guard the Pandorica for nearly 2,000 years while the Doctor travels ahead, dressed like a Roman, like a character in a fairy tale. This is insane commitment, further showing how Rory is the absolute peak of masculinity and an inspiration to us all. God, I want to kiss this man so bad. I love how Amy is branded the girl who waited because she waited 14 years for the Doctor, whereas Rory waited for 135 times longer. Amy doesn't deserve him, I'm gonna be honest. Rory, hit me up. Most of this episode involves the main cast running through a museum, usually from a Dalek. I mean, yeah, it definitely just exists because this episode needed a tangible threat, but the light from the Pandorica restoring the Dalek is a good hint as to how the episode will be resolved.
It's a fez. I wear a fez now. Fezzes are cool.
This is why I love this show. So, it turns out the only way to save the universe is for the Doctor to fly the Pandorica into the exploding TARDIS, with its restoration field being undisturbed by the universe ending due to the total security of the box. And this, in turn, will restore the universe. Yeah, there's a massive leap of logic necessary here, which is nothing new for Doctor Who finales. Pretty much all of the RTD finales ended with some Deus Ex Machina, but I think those endings work because they have build-up and they have consequences, be it the Doctor losing a companion, or a regeneration, or both. This ending isn't much different. There are still consequences to the restoration of the universe. The Doctor won't be there to see it. Him being trapped on the other side of the crack when it closes means he'll be erased from existence. So the Doctor's time stream begins unraveling. He begins seeing his recent pasts, and he realizes something. Amy can hear him. So, seeing one last chance to save himself, he starts leaving messages in her mind. There was a scene in Flesh and Stone where the Doctor starts talking to Amy, despite seemingly going off just seconds ago, and if you look closely, he's still wearing his jacket, despite an angel yoinking it off him earlier. People who originally noticed this may have chalked it up to a continuity error, but then it's revealed that this was the Doctor from the future, trying to get Amy to remember him. He gives one final speech to young Amy, summing up his life and adventures as though they were a fairy tale. But it's time for them both to grow up. He enters the crack, and it shuts. Amy's imaginary friend is gone. Her childhood fear is gone. And she finally grows up, ready to get married. But during the wedding, she keeps seeing reminders of the Doctor, like how River gifts Amy her diary, now blank, as those adventures with the Doctor never happened. I compared Amy's characterization in the 11th Hour to the people who watched Classic Who as kids, and had grown up by the time the show came back, and this is basically the same. Just like in real life, the Doctor may have gone, but his influence remains. He was seared onto the hearts of people everywhere, and maybe, if miracles do truly happen, he could come back. The TARDIS is described with the old wedding saying of
something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue,
which the Doctor foreshadowed in his story he told to Amy, a last-ditch attempt to use her wedding to bring himself back.
Well, I borrowed it. I was always going to take it back. brand new and ancient and the bluest blue.
And with that, the series is essentially over. But not before we get some foreshadowing for what comes next. So the whole exploding TARDIS thing has been solved, but who blew the TARDIS up? And why? Who really is River Song? And what is the silence? The Big Bang serves as a satisfying conclusion to the series, but it doesn't ignore that there are still mysteries out there that'll be solved in future. The exploding TARDIS was just a piece of the puzzle. And so, Amy and Rory leave their wedding to continue travelling with the Doctor. They may have grown up and finally got married, but they couldn't give this life up. And with that, Series 5 comes to an end. I love this finale. It concludes the overall narrative of Series 5 in a very satisfying way, balancing all its themes and arcs and ending on a high note. There are massive stretches in logic, there's no denying that, but I think the emotional value and the setup to this ending with the themes of the series make it work. Overall, a fairy tale ending for a fairy tale narrative. A refreshing contrast from the tragic and bittersweet finales of the RTD era. The 11th Doctor would then go on to appear in the spin-off show The Sarah Jane Adventures, before then entering his first Christmas special. Now, in the RTD era, there were Christmas specials every year, but the fact that it was Christmas never had a big impact on the plot. They were largely just regular, more light-hearted episodes that happened to be set at Christmas. This time around, though, the festive setting is actually a big part of the story, as the episode puts a timey-wimey spin on the classic Charles Dickens story, A Christmas Carol. While previous Christmas specials were almost entirely Earthbound, this episode takes a more whimsical sci-fi approach, the episode being set in the far future on another planet, but still looking like Victorian-era Christmas. The overall aesthetic and feel of this episode is really unique and immersive. In the original Christmas Carol story, Ebenezer Scrooge is a cruel, heartless man who sees no joy in life, until he's visited by 3 ghosts on Christmas Eve, showing him his past, the life he creates in the present for those around him, and what the future holds if he continues on this path, making him wake the next morning a new bloke. This episode's Scrooge is Kazran Sardik, who is immediately established as vile and heartless. He's a bloke of immense power, being able to control the sky. There's a spaceship about to crash into the planet, and Sardik could save them, but won't. Amy and Rory are on the ship, getting a bit freaky, and so the Doctor has to change his mind. So he goes back on Kazran's timeline and tries to make him change and grow as a person. I really like the way the Doctor acts at the beginning of this episode, just crashing in, completely ADHD pilled. But the more serious side of his character still shows, most notably in this absolutely iconic line.
Do you know, in 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before.
The Doctor finds a video Kazran made in his bedroom as a child, where his father hits him, and it all makes sense. Kazran was scared of becoming like his dad, not realizing he's basically become him anyway. But there's still a bit of hope, as Kazran hesitated to hit a child, so the potential for him to change is there. And so the Doctor goes back and provides a positive influence on young Kazran. The Doctor is outright aware he's recreating the original A Christmas Carol story, being inspired by it after hearing A Christmas Carol. Kazran was a child full of wonder and imagination, but this was beaten out of him until he became the cruel old man we see at the start of the episode. Present-day Kazran also watches this alternate timeline happen in real time through the video, which I like. It keeps the overall structure of A Christmas Carol while allowing all of the scenes set in the past to stand on their own as a fun adventure, rather than Kazran just being shown his past. It also turns out that Kazran's dad has lots of people frozen in boxes, those people being family members of people who borrowed money from him. People essentially being used as a loan. This is a surprisingly dark and twisted concept, especially for a Christmas episode, that I feel could make a brilliant plot on its own. They get a woman called Abigail out of a box, and she becomes a positive influence on Kazran as well, the 3 of them having adventures every year. It's a really fun sequence, interspersed with old Kazran looking back on those brand new memories, the picture of his dad being replaced with a picture of Abigail. But there's a level of bittersweetness, as it's revealed Abigail only has a handful of days left to live, and each Christmas Eve knocks a day off that counter. With only 1 day left for her to live, Kazran locks her in the box one last time, his face hardening as his childhood joy disappears. Even the Doctor couldn't change Kazran for the better. He only postponed Kazran's descent into misery, and if anything, he possibly made things worse, as the Doctor makes himself the person Kazran blames for his misery rather than his father. And so, to change things up, Amy tries influencing Kazran. By this point, he's still far from mellowed, but the Doctor rewriting his past definitely had some level of influence on him and his empathy. And so Amy shows him all the people on the ship who he's about to let die. It's easy not to think much of a tragedy when you hear about it sitting comfortably in your own home, but it's different when you actually get to see the people caught in the tragedy. And finally, in a very hard-hitting moment, the Doctor shows Kazran his future. But not in the way you'd expect. He shows young Kazran who he'll become. This boy who lived in fear of his dad can't tell the difference when looking at who he grows up to be. His own worst fear come true. And it breaks him. But with that wake-up call, he finally realizes he needs to save the people on the spaceship. So they get Abigail out one last time, and she sings to the fish to control them. It's not like the episode abandons its sci-fi concepts just to explain this as, haha, singing controls space fish. Like, the Doctor gives a scientific explanation for why the singing affects the fish if you really needed it. But come on, it's Christmas. Flying fish can save a spaceship with the power of music. Just accept it. It is a really emotional moment that uses all the plot points established earlier to make a really impactful and bittersweet ending. I love it. This episode is pretty much what it says on the tin. A Doctor Who adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And I love it. It hits all of its plot beats brilliantly, creating an emotional ride that stands out like no previous Christmas special did. Stephen Moffat had a lot of fun writing this episode, and it shows. Michael Gambon does a fantastic job as Sardic, portraying the layers and development of the character in a really captivating way. I also think Matt Smith is on top form as the 11th Doctor in this episode. The whimsy of the character blending with his more serious side in a great way, having some really iconic moments. Overall, a magnificent epilogue to Series 5. And so, that's Series 5. This is a beloved series for many people, myself included. Stephen Moffat reinvents the show brilliantly, keeping a level of familiarity while setting the show up for the complex direction he was taking it. You can see how Series 5 was meant to act as a sort of bridge between eras, a way to ease the audience in before hitting them with the big stuff, down to the way the series is structured. Series 5 follows the same episode structure as Series 1 to 4, with a two-part story around Episode 4, another two-parter around Episode 8, and a two-part finale. No other series in the Moffat era has this layout, so you can see how they tried to give viewers some level of familiarity. Because there's no denying, this was a massive leap for the show. The changing of the entire production team, coupled with the departure of arguably the most beloved Doctor of all time, wasn't going to be easy. And while there are some episodes that do fall short, I think the series as a whole holds up very strongly to this day. Like, when this series hits, it hits, providing some of the best Doctor Who out there. Matt Smith absolutely kills it as the Doctor, portraying the range and wisdom and humour of the character incredibly well, feeling fresh and new while still undeniably being the same Time Lord we know and love. I think his performance as the Doctor only gets better from here, which is a testament to Smith as an actor. Amy and Rory are really great companions too, their character arcs and personalities being really well done and interesting. Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill bringing their characters to life. There's a reason this is many people's favourite TARDIS team. Mainly because Rory is the best character to ever exist and makes every episode perfect simply by being in it. Please kiss me, Rory, please. The arc of the cracks is really good. This really creepy thing following the Doctor everywhere. The episodes don't undersell its power or meaning, and the whole arc of the TARDIS exploding is a really intriguing beginning of the storyline for the rest of this era. The way the series introduces its main characters while expanding on previous characters like River is great. And the whole fairy tale vibe of the series fits brilliantly into the narrative, all topped off with Murray Gold's score. I didn't talk much about the soundtrack in my Capaldi era video, which was frankly criminal of me, as the soundtrack is such a big part of Doctor Who. Murray Gold is a magnificent composer, and I think the 11th Doctor era was when he hit his peak. The bombastic orchestra of the first few series changes into a more melancholic, whimsical sound that fits the vibe of the series perfectly. The Series 5 OST is easily the one I have the most nostalgia for. Those light piano melodies never failing to transport me back to the childlike wonder of falling in love with this show for the first time. Series 5 is a masterpiece. So, on to Series 6. This is where things get mental. Series 5 was essentially the statement of intent for the Smith era, and Series 6 dives fully into the deep end, as we get a semi-serialized narrative, a good portion of the episodes tying into the overall plot, with some standalone episodes sprinkled in there. This series elaborates on the mystery of the silence, and finally gives an answer to the question, who is River Song? Also, fun fact, there was a scrapped episode submitted for this series by former showrunner Russell T. Davis. It never happens due to budget constraints, but that scrapped episode ended up becoming Dot and Bubble in the latest series. Which does make me wonder how that episode would have originally worked, particularly the ending. Anyway, Series 6 is a very experimental and out there series, with its fair share of ups and downs, but it's another series I love to bits. So, let's get into it. So, first, the context for this series opener. Doctor Who was starting to become a lot more popular in America around Series 5, with A Christmas Carol being the first episode to be broadcast simultaneously in the UK and US. This prompted the production team to make a series opener set in America, the first episode of the show to properly do so, and Stephen Moffat decided to make an adventure set around the moon landing in 1969. And that's the only notable thing from this episode. Yep, the first thing we see is essentially how things have changed for the main characters since we last saw them. The Doctor still having crazy adventures, Amy and Rory now owning their own house, and River is still alive. The episode also tries to keep new viewers up with the main cast here, establishing the Doctor and River's relationship through the eyes of Rory, who's still very new to all of this. This series is the first time in a while where we consistently get a team of 4 in the TARDIS. Excluding one-off episodes like Boomtown, the last time the main cast had been this full was season 19, 29 years prior. There's a risk of the episodes feeling overcrowded because of this, but the Smith era so far has done exactly what you should do when introducing a larger team dynamic. Series 11. We're introduced to Amy and Rory at the start of Series 5. Then we get a few episodes to learn about Amy. After she's fully established, Rory joins in. All the while, we get occasional appearances from River. All this means that when we finally do get a proper adventure with the 4 of them, it doesn't feel overcrowded, and everything feels more natural. If Series 5 had started with the 4 of them all meeting at once and then all travelling together, it would make things feel really clunky, and it would have made it much harder to properly establish them all as characters. Hey, why is Series 11 footage on my screen right now? If you ask me, there's nothing better than introducing someone to Doctor Who and seeing their immediate reactions to all of the twists. And Series 6 is full of those moments. This episode immediately establishes what Series 6 is going to be all about, providing one twist after another, immediately slapping us with the main arc of the series.
Amy! Stay back! I'm sorry.
The death of the Doctor. I love the way this scene is done. The Doctor's mood's gradually getting more melancholy, and there's a sense of defeat as soon as Canton appears and the astronaut comes out of the lake. The eerie silence as we watch their interaction from a distance, the cinematic feel of it, the performances, it's such an impactful scene. And then the rug is pulled from under us once again, as another Doctor, 200 years younger than the one who died, spawns in, getting a mysterious invite to the lake just like the rest of them. It makes the death we saw just feel a lot more real and final, like the Doctor in this series is living on borrowed time, and the interactions between his companions give the whole thing an ominous vibe. I also love how the 11th Doctor's darker, more serious side shows up here. It's a good moment showing the more mature side of this Doctor that gradually gets more prevalent over time. This episode is set in America, and the production team really wants you to know that. The adventure is full of American stuff, like the President, NASA, FBI agents, guns. It does add a lot to the story though, lending it a more high-budget, cinematic feel, and it works really well.
Man or woman? Neither.
Oh hell nah, the liberals are going after President Nixon.
What's wrong? I've got a toilet going. Oh, here, toilet guys.
The first proper introduction to the silence in this episode is really cool. Inspired by the Edvard Munch painting The Scream, mixed with those men in black suits, these guys have a really unique design and are really creepy. The fact that they don't have mouths but still speak really makes it feel like they're in the characters' heads.
Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, River.
Surnames of three of America's founding fathers.
Lovely fellas. Two of them fancied me.
Waiting for the extended cut of Hamilton where he and the Doctor make out, or where Hamilton and Jefferson fight over the Doctor. Can we please make this happen? Anyway, there's a good moment where River starts telling Rory about how her relationship with the Doctor works, how he made a big impact on her life when she was young. I like that it's Rory she's telling this to, as he saw firsthand how the Doctor can change the lives of people by dropping out of the sky. He's the only one who isn't infatuated with the Doctor, but he saw how it changed Amy and almost ruined their marriage. It's also another good example of the way we see River's character arc. She's talking about dreading the day the Doctor has no idea who she is, but we've already seen this. And so it makes this foreshadowing, for lack of a better word, really interesting, as that day really did kill her.
Doctor, I'm pregnant.
Nah, genuinely though, this cliffhanger is so good. Also, the fact that Amy's child shows up immediately after she tells the Doctor she's pregnant is a cool, subtle bit of foreshadowing. So, in Day of the Moon, we sort of get payoff for this line.
I'm not going to be there to catch you every time you feel like jumping out of a spaceship.
And you are so wrong.
This scene in the orphanage is really creepy, with the owner whose memory has been fried by the silence, as well as Amy's body suddenly being covered in tally marks, even though we haven't seen any silence yet. The show does moments like this a few times in this series, and it works really well, like really putting you in the character's position, as these creatures really are hiding everywhere. It's in this episode we see the beginning of Amy's mystery for the first half of the series. The woman in the eye patch staring at her. This is Madame Kavarian, essentially the main villain of Series 6, a character that's unfortunately very tainted due to being played by Frances Barber, who... Jesus Christ. But then Amy gets captured by the silence, which allows Rory to be the main companion for most of the episode, once again proving that he is a proper full-time companion on the level of Amy, and not just the comic relief. Except for when he is. The episode also does this weird thing where it tries to bring back the who will Amy choose thing from last series, which I'm not a big fan of. Like, that arc was done. Also, Rory waited nearly 2,000 years for Amy and remembers lots of it. So you can't really just try and undo that whole arc for one episode and then end it exactly where it already ended before. The silence are shown to have a massive level of power and influence in this episode, to the point where the main characters set up an elaborate scheme lasting months, building an impenetrable prison purely so they can operate in peace without the silence watching them. The ending to this episode is iconic. The episode ends up becoming a sort of prequel to The Lodger, the Silence's makeshift TARDIS being the same ship from that episode. Fine, you got me to mention The Lodger, you sick fucks. And so, the Doctor defeats the Silence by using their powers against them, interrupting the footage of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon with a message from the Silence telling people to kill them, weaponizing their powers of mind control, and the whole thing is just so cool.
My old fella didn't see that, did he? He gets ever so cross.
Moffat, I know what you are. So, with a bittersweet ending for the Doctor and River and a what the fuck, the episode ends. The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon are pretty good contenders for the best series opener of all time in my opinion. Moffat is on top form here, starting this wild series off with a bang, providing twist after sex joke. There are so many impactful moments. The story is brilliant with a satisfying ending, and it does a great job at setting up all the mysteries of the series. Stuart Milligan is great as Nixon too, really feeling like the actual guy. The Silence are awesome, the creepiness and action are really well done. It's a brilliant series opener. In typical Doctor Who fashion, this magnificent opening is immediately followed by mid. Okay, yeah, I don't really have much to say about this episode. This was originally meant to be episode 9 in place of Night Terrors, but it was pushed back to episode 3. As Moffat felt the first half of Series 6 would have been too dark with Night Terrors in it. As such, there's a big part of this episode that gets completely removed, massively undoing the thematic connection and value it originally had with the rest of the series. The episode is about valuing the time you have with those around you, rather than the time you've lost, shown by Captain Avery reconciling with his son. This episode was supposed to come right after Let's Kill Hitler, where Amy and Rory realised they grew up alongside the daughter they never got to raise. But due to the episodes being shuffled around, this aspect was scrapped, so the episode just ends up being kinda there. It sticks out like a sore thumb among the rest of the first half of this series. The episode is an unintentional prequel to the 1966 story The Smugglers. That's pretty cool. There's a bit at the end where Amy gives Rory CPR and it doesn't just immediately save him like in the films. I like that bit. Yeah, sea ghost that makes people horny. What an episode. Alright, we are so back. Okay, first of all, I feel the need to mention that The Doctor's Wife was written by Neil Gaiman, an author who, unfortunately, I'm hesitant to praise like I absolutely would have done previously, which is why it's kinda awkward that this episode is really good. So, in this episode, the soul of the TARDIS gets put in a human body, as the box itself is possessed and about to get eaten by a big squelchy planet. This episode dives a lot more into the 11th Doctor's hidden guilt, and explores more of that serious side that becomes more common in this series. We start with the Doctor getting a distress call from another Time Lord. Up until this point, the Doctor believed he was the last Time Lord, the only other survivor being his evil counterpart, the Master, who he'd likely presumed dead due to him going back into the Time War. But this episode teases the possibility of a good Time Lord out there, the Doctor seeing a chance to be forgiven, to get some hope to justify killing his people. This is also the first time it was confirmed in the show that Time Lords could change gender during regeneration, which I guarantee has caused plenty of incels to dislike this episode. It's revealed a little later on that the distress call was a trap to lure the Doctor here, as House has kept psychic containers from Time Lords he's killed. This is where that darker side of 11 shows, and it's so good. I mean, he had a chance to see another Time Lord, to hear the words, "I forgive you." So to have that taken away so soon after letting his excitement get to him, after spending this whole incarnation running from his guilt, it's a really powerful moment. One of the highlights of this episode is the design. This messy, cobbled-together planet outside the universe is just so fitting for this episode. It's very dark and eerie. I also like the junkyards. The whole location is just very unique. Wait a minute, a TARDIS starting out in a junkyard? The direction is also really good, with lots of unique shots that sell the weirdness and impactfulness of the episode really well, like the camera spinning around the Doctor when he hears Time Lord voices. Amy and Rory also spend a lot of the episode trapped in the TARDIS corridors, and these scenes are great. There's a lot of really creepy and unique imagery. It's enough to compensate that we don't see much of the TARDIS outside of the corridors. This is all being done by House, the sentient asteroid on which the episode is set. I love House. Michael Sheen brings such a sinister vibe to the character, feeling genuinely intimidating despite just being a disembodied voice. Now, for the main hook of the episode. The TARDIS. I love the way the TARDIS consciousness is portrayed in this episode, how she immediately runs onto the scene, telling the characters what's going to happen in the near future, calling the Doctor her thief, biting him. Sure, her dialogue is very snappy, not a single line wasted, as if she already knows the most efficient way to get through the episode. Except for this line.
I push!
Every single time, 700 years, police box doors open out the way.
Like, you know that sign is referring to the little door with the phone, right? But yeah, the Doctor and the TARDIS's relationship is on point. You really get the feeling these are two really old friends, despite never actually talking until now. There are also some major revelations in the show's lore that not only make sense, but I think are brilliant things to be canonized. Firstly, the TARDIS claims that her and the Doctor's relationship is a two-way thing, how they both stole each other. The Doctor's bond with the TARDIS has always been significant throughout the show, so the idea that they were meant for each other, provided with a nice subversion on the whole the Doctor stole a TARDIS and ran away thing, is great. Also,
you didn't always take me where I wanted to go.
No, but I always took you where you needed to go.
This is single-handedly one of the best and most important lines in the entire show. It pretty much explains why the Doctor's adventures have gone the way they have, why they always seem to arrive at the right place at the right time. And it does this without feeling like a cheap line that ruins the mystery of the show. It's so good. The Doctor and the TARDIS build their own TARDIS to enter the possessed original TARDIS. Keep up. This makeshift TARDIS was designed by a kid as part of a Blue Peter competition, and I like it. It fits the junkyard aesthetic, really simple and cobbled together, essentially ditching the bigger on the inside thing, and it works. The third act takes place in the 9th and 10th Doctor's TARDIS console, which is really cool. Originally, the plan was to have a classic era console, but budget constraints meant that the previous coral design was used one last time before being demolished. I just think this is a really cool detail. Seeing the 11th Doctor in the 10th Doctor's TARDIS outside of his regeneration scene is such a nice little surprise for the viewer. The console room also looks really good with the updated camera quality of this era, and I love seeing it shrouded in green light, a nice subversion of the red light we saw a few times back in the day. House is defeated by his own overconfidence, being so occupied toying with the main characters, debating how to kill them, he doesn't realise he's allowed the soul of the TARDIS to enter the console room and take over again. Having killed so many Time Lords, he thought this would just be another easy task. But this exchange between him and the Doctor perfectly sums up House's overconfidence, as well as being such a badass line from the Doctor.
Fear me, I've killed hundreds of Time Lords.
Fear me, I've killed all of them.
I just wanted to say.
Sutek has actually been clinging on to me for ages now. He's waiting to emerge, but oh well, I guess that doesn't matter right now. Jokes aside, this is a really emotional scene. Once again, the Doctor had a brief moment of hope, as he could talk to his longest and most faithful companion. But their time together was too short. The episode really sells the uniqueness and impact of a situation like this, and ends it in a very satisfying and powerful way. The Doctor's Wife is a top-tier episode. Considering how much it has to fit into 45 minutes, it handles all its aspects brilliantly, containing great set design, directing, creepiness, and horror, a massive impact on the show's lore in several ways, a threatening villain, and the performances from the main actors are amazing. I think this is another one of Matt Smith's absolute highlights, showing the range of the Doctor and himself as an actor. The episode has emotion and, once again, bittersweetness. Also, there's a nude. You can never go wrong with a nude. At this point, the mid-series finale is approaching, and we've got the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People to set it up. This episode isn't all that highly regarded as far as I can tell, but honestly, I think it's pretty good. This episode was written by Life on Mars co-creator Matthew Graham, whose only other writing credit for the show at this point was the Series 2 episode Fear Her, an episode which, as of recording, is still removed from iPlayer. I mean, I'm fully aware of the reason why, but thankfully. This adventure is set in a factory in the 22nd century, where workers use artificially created doppelgangers of themselves that they control and use to do all the risky industrial work with no real risk to themselves. We see this in the cold open as one of the workers falls into a vat of acid, and their reactions make it seem more like an inconvenience than anything. These guys are more bothered about the cost of the suit than the dead guy. Wait a minute, I think one of the main highlights of this episode is the Doctor. There's always this underlying ulterior motive in his behaviour, like he knows more about the flesh than he's letting on, which turns out to be true. It's great rewatching this episode when you know the Doctor's true motivations here. It makes him seem a lot more calculated, and he gives me a bit of a 7th Doctor vibe. Then, in The Almost People, there are two Doctors. Not only do they have good chemistry, but they use this to their advantage, swapping lives, essentially. So Amy thinks the real Doctor is actually the ganger. It helps them learn more about the flesh, and it's another example of that long-term planning and manipulation. A little thing at the start of this episode that I love is the Doctor, Amy, and Rory just chilling in the TARDIS, like they're in a student accommodation or something. Obviously, life in the TARDIS isn't just constant life-threatening danger. There's gonna be downtime and relaxing stuff in between, and I love when we get to see that. The way we finally see what the flesh is all about is really well done. The imagery of it coming to life, sprouting an identical copy of a person with memories and everything, is so weird and cool. Cloning is a classic sci-fi concept, and lab-grown people aren't even a new concept for Doctor Who. Also, I promised myself I wouldn't make a cum joke. Thankfully, the episode did it for me.
We're all jelly wonts. Little jelly eggs sitting in goo.
Yeah, thanks. Too much information.
This episode technically has a large cast of characters, since a lot of them are duplicated, so things feel quite crowded. But I think the way they're characterized is pretty good. Like how Cleves, the leader, is someone who cares about her work and runs a tight ship, but also has a more relaxed side. Another solar storm gives the gangers their own sentience, and that's what this episode revolves around. There's a lot of debate as to whether they count as proper life forms deserving of existence, since they're essentially clones of people who already exist. And yeah, this is a nuanced and complicated debate, especially for these workers. They've never seen the flesh as anything more than a tool, so it makes sense that the idea of it having sentience, being capable of its own thoughts and feelings, would be weird for them, especially since it's their lives and memories it's copying. But the gangers are individuals, they have their own thoughts and opinions, shown by how the original Cleves is more aggressive and antagonistic, while the ganger Cleves is a lot more reserved and pacifistic. The Almost People, which I will admit I like a lot more than the Rebel Flesh, tackles this moral dilemma really well, with the inclusion of Jimmy's son. The ganger Jimmy talks to him since it is essentially his son, and it makes the other gangers realize they just want to live in peace. This episode sorta does the Zygon 2-parter in Series 9, but 4 years earlier, as it is about extremist clones ready for revolution, not taking the time to consider the world they're inheriting. The simple stuff, like family. There's also a moment where the original Jimmy dies and makes his ganger promise to be a dad, which makes for a bittersweet moment at the end when Jimmy reunites with his son. Because yeah, Adam's still got his dad, this is still the same person, but his original dad died, and he'll never know. And that makes for a really powerful moment, honestly. As I said earlier, the Doctors try to understand the flesh and themselves better through the eyes of Amy, as she clearly struggles to accept the ganger as the Doctor, not realizing the two of them swapped lives. She sees the ganger behave how she thinks the Doctor would, and accepts it, not realizing her own prejudice, to the point where she tells the actual Doctor about his own death, thinking it's the ganger. This is pretty big, because we've seen how seeing his death has stuck with Amy, and how important it is that he doesn't know about it. The Doctors swapping with each other shows the prejudice of Amy and the rest of the crew, as they all discriminate against who they believe to be the ganger Doctor, showing how they can't actually tell what a ganger is a lot of the time anyway. Throughout this story, Rory has been supportive of Jennifer, being there for her and siding with her in her plea to stop the treatment of gangers as they're left to rot. The episode even tricks you into believing this is the real Jen as she kills her ganger, but then it's revealed that there were actually two gangers, which is a good twist. I also like the theme of Rory prioritizing someone else and Amy being the one left behind, worrying about him now instead. Anyway, at the end, the Jenny ganger evolves into a big monster. I mean, it gets points for scaring me as a kid, but it doesn't really serve a purpose outside of there needing to be some big monster for the climactic end. And so, with Jimmy off to live his life, the two other survivors go off to tell the world about the gangers. Those two survivors being human Cleves and the ganger of the guy with the least characterization. I don't know, I feel like this would have been better if both Cleves were there. I feel like that would really sell the idea that the gangers are people too, but oh well. And just as you think the episode is coming to an end...
Breathe.
Oh! You're gonna have to start explaining some of this to me, Doctor.
What, the birds and the bees? She's having a baby.
My god, I love this ending. Everything suddenly becomes really ominous as this bombshell is dropped on us out of nowhere. The Doctor planned this adventure all along, wanting to learn about the flesh so he could figure out how to free Amy. She's been a ganger for the whole series, throughout which the TARDIS has struggled to confirm whether she's pregnant or not. So the Doctor played the long game, showing his more manipulative side. And on that note, I love the way he suddenly gets so serious. This whole scene really gives an Eve of War vibe, making sure you know the next episode is gonna be big.
I'm right here.
No, you're not. You haven't been here for a long, long time.
And with that, we head into the mid-series finale. Yeah, Series 6 was split into 2 parts throughout 2011, with A Good Man Goes to War airing in early June, and the following episode not airing until the end of August. The series was split in half to try and avoid the rating slump that typically happens at the midway point of a series, and so it offers the chance to solve some of the mysteries of the series so far while blueballing you just enough to create hype for the second half. This episode really challenges the Doctor's morals, putting his entire life up until this point into question as it nears the end. Also, fun fact, this episode was originally planned to have Captain Jack and Ood Sigma in it, but John Barrowman couldn't make it as he was filming for Series 4 of Torchwood, and Ood Sigma wasn't in the episode, just because, I guess. No Ood appear in the episode, but Russell T Davies is still credited as their creator. The way this episode starts is so badass. Specifically Rory. His character development up until this point has genuinely been so good, now at the point where he'll gladly take on a cyber legion with no fear purely to save Amy. You can see why I'm in love with this man, can't you? Oh, and then the Doctor blows up the entire Legion just to show that he can. It's a really cool moment, but also contributes to the reputation the Doctor is beginning to give himself that gets explored later on. Also, apparently the Cybermen have a fire escape. I find that very funny for some reason.
It's my birthday.
This is actually genius foreshadowing. The Doctor infiltrates the big soldier rally and promises to speak with the leader, after he brings down the entire army, whilst knowing exactly how long that will take, down to the second. Well, he was 2 seconds off, but the point still stands. He's able to disarm an entire army without really doing anything, then summoning what is presumably Madame Vastra's Silurian tribe and the Jadoon, as well as Danny Boy from Victory of the Daleks and Captain Avery, because why not? All this shows why the Doctor has this mythical status, but Lorna's conversation with Amy hints at the more negative connotations that come with that status.
He's sort of like a dark legend.
The whole first half of the episode has a really triumphant, heroic feel, but River's prophecy at the start leaves a sense of underlying tension, like you're just waiting for something bad to happen. Anyway, then something bad happens, so it turns in that Amy and Rory's baby has Time Lord DNA. If you don't know, the Time Lords gained their powers from prolonged exposure to the time vortex. Oh, wait a minute. And so Melody being conceived in the TARDIS meant she had some Time Lord DNA inside her. And Madame Kavarian likely took her away and used some magical future sciencey stuff to exacerbate those traits, making Melody as close to a Time Lord as they could. I know plenty of people see this as a big leap in logic, but honestly, I can get behind this. It's easier to accept than the Pandorica and the TARDIS stuff. But then Vastra proposes the idea that they did this because they consider a Time Lord an ideal weapon. Because of the Doctor, his mythical status, his supposed immortality, his ability to tear down worlds unchallenged. Suddenly, that story of the monster in the Pandorica becomes a chilling bit of foreshadowing.
A nameless, terrible thing, soaked in the blood of a billion galaxies. And nothing could stop it or hold it or reason with it. One day it would just drop out of the sky and tear down your world.
And this marks the start of the Doctor's descent from his throne of mad power. Things fall apart so quickly, as we find out everything, the retreat, the rescuing of Melody, was all a trap. Madame Kavarian and the Headless Monks planned it all to give the Doctor and his army a false sense of security, before surprising them with an attack while Kavarian takes off with the real Melody. And all this to create the perfect warrior to kill the Doctor. But just as things hit their lowest, this scene happens. Absolute cinema. River finally spawns in and puts the Doctor's attitude in this episode, and just generally, into question. It's becoming quite clear that the Doctor is starting to buy into his own legend a little too much. He has a lot of power, a lot of influence. He can change people's entire lives within a few minutes. And he indulges in it, to the point where he'll make incredibly callous decisions while being so sure he's doing the right thing. He's so influential to the entire universe that we get this line from River.
Doctor, the word for healer and wise man throughout the universe. We get that word from you, you know.
This idea was actually proposed by Stephen Moffat on a forum back in the 90s. The Doctor chose that name because of its meaning, so essentially the Doctor's life and his motivation to be a hero comes from himself. The name of the Doctor itself is a bootstrap paradox, and this is such a sudden but massive revelation that I love. The Doctor is so influential, he even inspires himself. But this new godlike status the Doctor has indulged in after the Time War has had ramifications.
To the people of the Gamma Forests, the word Doctor means mighty warrior.
This dissection of the Doctor feels right out of the Capaldi era, and I love it. And then the Doctor learns who River really is, and everything suddenly changes. He goes from down and angry to happy and optimistic instantly. But why, oh my god!
It's me. I'm Melody. I'm your daughter.
Yeah, this is an iconic and genius reveal that Moffat had been planning since the start, intentionally making Pond Amy's last name for this reveal. I mean, it's really good, but Amy seems to have a bit of a habit of pointing a gun at her daughter. Honestly, when I started working on this video, I forgot how awesome A Good Man Goes to War is. This is such an epic and climactic story that really feels like it pays off a lot of the mysteries of the era so far, while still leaving you with plenty of unanswered questions. Now, I love a good character study. Big surprise. And this episode does that too, putting the Doctor's character into question in a way that almost foreshadows the Capaldi era. It's such a good episode. So, after a worldwide catastrophe that never gets mentioned in the main show, summer falls, and the series picks up again with Let's Kill Hitler. Because, yeah, this episode is meant to be another sort of big series opener, but the plan was for it to also be a subversion of the Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon, being lighter and more comedic. You can immediately tell this is meant to be a subversion, as it starts with Amy and Rory trying to get the Doctor's attention, a contrast to the Impossible Astronaut where he was trying to get theirs. It's also here that we're introduced to Mel's, Amy and Rory's lifelong friend, who just spawned in now apparently. The first time we see her, she's blocking the sunlight. Wait a minute. Also, fun fact, one of the people who auditioned for the role of Mel's was Jenna Coleman, who went on to play Clara in the following series. This episode sees the squad dropping in 1938 Berlin, and accidentally saving Hitler's life. Plus 20 assist. I can't say that. But yeah, Hitler doesn't really have much of a presence in this episode, and when he does, he's pretty much just a laughingstock, which is how you should portray Hitler as far as I'm concerned. I want to say Albert Welling is good in the role, but I don't know if calling someone a good Hitler is really a compliment.
Does anybody else find his day just a bit difficult? I'm getting this sort of banging in my head.
Almost like a drum beat? Jokes aside, there was a genuine theory back in the day that Rory was the master. Because of this line, and because he always comes back. I still believe it. Hitler is being tracked down by the Tesselector, a big space robot controlled by midgets that hoovers up bad people. I like this concept, but the best part has got to be the antibodies. I just love the whole robot jellyfish with overly polite death threats. This is how I imagine it would sound if you got mugged in Cambridge.
Why are you disrespecting me, bruv? My mistake, original gangster. No, this cannot be forgiven. Now empty the compartments of your pantaloons. For what purpose?
The main focus of this episode is the relationship between Amy, Rory, and River, as they realize they grew up with their daughter without knowing. The fact that we never saw Mel's before this episode does somewhat lessen the impact of this reveal. We do get this flashback sequence of the three of them growing up together, Mel's clearly having a rebellious streak, but this is genuinely a nice timey-wimey twist that contrasts the dark reality of Amy and Rory's baby being stolen. We've pretty much seen River's character arc in reverse order, so while this is the beginning of her journey, it comes after we've already got to know the less psychopathic version of her, as the River we see in this episode is a far cry from the old, mature River we met in the library. The Doctor and River have a bit of a one-upping each other competition, both of them outsmarting each other over and over. It does get a little too close to exactly what The Curse of Fatal Death was parodying, but then River gets the last one-up on the Doctor, poisoning him with a kiss. I have mixed opinions on River in this episode. On one hand, seeing this more reckless, immature version of her makes sense and is cool. But on the other hand, why is she so horny? I get she's infatuated with the Doctor and all, but I think her sexual attitude is a little over the top. She does have some good moments though.
Can you ride a motorbike?
I expect so. It's that sort of day.
Rory Williams, you will always be famous. Anyway, the Doctor is dying, and the TARDIS interface decides now is a good time to remind him of all the people he screwed up over the years, through the art of PNGs, and he decides to put on a show, spending the last half an hour of life in a suit with a sonic cane, just in time for the Tesselector to give generic exposition about the silence. Did Chris Chibnall ghostwrite this or something? But the Doctor still trying to save his friends with only minutes to live himself is a very doctory thing. So anyways, River can just fly the TARDIS due to being conceived in it. I don't really like this. And the episode ends with River saving the Doctor, once again showing the influence he can have in such a short time, even changing the mind of the person engineered to kill him. Let's Kill Hitler is chaotic, to say the least. Now, it's important to consider the context behind this period of the show. At this point, Stephen Moffat was the head writer and showrunner for Doctor Who and Sherlock, as well as writing for the film The Adventures of Tintin. That's a lot of stuff to be working on. As such, it got to the point where his submitted scripts for Let's Kill Hitler and The Wedding of River Song were first drafts. But honestly, especially considering this episode was a first draft. It's alright. I think it kinda starts losing it towards the end, but the episode has some good moments. I like the Tesselecta antibodies. Rory is in this episode. Like I said earlier, this episode was originally supposed to be followed with The Curse of the Black Spot, which would have themes of valuing the time you have with family, rather than the time you lost. But instead, we get night terrors. Okay, I know this episode has its flaws, the pacing is a bit weird, it takes way too long for any of the actual action to happen. Rory's underreaction to his wife being turned into a doll is both out of character and reduces the fear factor of the dolls somewhat. But this episode has a sweet ending, and it gets a pass purely because of how much it traumatized me as a child. This episode was written by Mark Gatiss, and was inspired by his childhood fear of old dolls. So his response was to make a whole new generation scared of them too. Thanks, Mark. The episode is about a boy called George, a very anxious kid with a fear of being rejected by the people around him. There have been a lot of autism comparisons made here with the odd rituals and stuff, and as an autistic person who did behave similarly to George when I was that age, yeah, I definitely see it. I can also send psychic messages across the universe, funnily enough. The Doctor is also the only one to immediately get along with George, further proving that the Doctor is autistic and you cannot tell me otherwise. Honestly, I still think the creepiness of this episode holds up now. Personally, the scene of the landlord turning into a peg doll rivals the empty child scene in terms of how much it freaked me out. I still find these things so creepy, like they truly feel like an unstoppable threat. Mainly because of just how helpless the characters are here. I think this episode was one of the last major examples of Doctor Who being set on traumatizing an entire generation. That kind of stuff existed a lot in the Davis era, but I think it unfortunately became less common in the Moffat era and basically non-existent in the Chibnall era. I think part of what made Doctor Who so iconic was the horror and tension that would stick with you, and it's a big part of why I love Wild Blue Yonder so much. It felt like a proper return to the pure creepiness that had been lacking from the show for a while. I see a lot of people call this episode Fear Her But Better, and yeah, I can agree with that.
Well, it's good to be all back together again, in the flesh.
You know, since this episode was supposed to be in the first half of the series, Amy still would have been a flesh duplicate at this point. Genuinely really good foreshadowing there that just kind of loses its double meaning, unfortunately. Alright. The Girl Who Waited is a banger. This is a much smaller episode cast-wise, pretty much only featuring the main trio, as we get more of a character piece, focusing on the relationship between them and where it's heading, as Amy and Rory's lives have been permanently changed due to their adventures in the TARDIS. The first couple minutes of this episode are another great example of why this TARDIS team is so iconic. All the wittiness and the great dynamics between all of them, it really sells that these guys have a lot of fun together and feel really comfortable around each other. The episode revolves around Amy going into the wrong time stream, because she didn't think to just ask which button to press. I guess it was a canon event. The Doctor also spends most of this episode stuck in the TARDIS, as the entire planet of Apalapachia has been struck with a virus that only kills two-hearted beings, like Apalapachians and Time Lords. And the Meep. The Doctor not having much physical presence here was because it was being filmed in the same block as Closing Time, which barely features the Ponds. This allows the main focus of the episode to be on Amy and Rory's relationship. So, when an Apalapachian is dying and only has a day to live, they can go into this different time stream and have their final day stretched out into a lifetime, with loved ones watching them grow old in front of their eyes. This is one of those Black Mirror-esque sci-fi concepts that gets more twisted the more you think about it. Would you want to watch your friends or family grow old before your eyes? Or would it be more merciful to just let them have their one day? I mean, we never find out whether all these people are happy with this life, and I like that the reality of this lifelong quarantine is left to your own interpretation. How you think you'd perceive it. I also really like the setting of the hospital. It's very minimalist, but this is a hospital. It makes sense that it feels all sanitized with a bit of alien weirdness sprinkled in. The handbots are also really cool. Again, a simplistic design that makes sense and is memorable. Something I think Series 6 excels at is memorable villains. I remember when these episodes came out and my friends and I would pretend to be the Tesselecta antibodies or the handbots on the school playground. Something that happens quite a bit in this show is people waiting for the Doctor. You had it in The Girl in the Fireplace, which actually had a similar premise to The Girl Who Waited, both being about two timelines running at different speeds. And you also had Amy waiting for the Doctor when they first met. This happens again here, as Amy is left for 36 years. alone. No one around her, just an AI interface, as she spends every day fighting for survival against these reverse zombie robots. Naturally, this changes her, changes how she views the world and her life, and creates resentment towards the Doctor, who abandoned her there. As we see in the following episode, Amy's biggest fear is being left to wait for the Doctor, so it makes sense that this scenario would lead to hatred towards him. In the blink of an eye, that chemistry we saw at the start is gone, and we see one of the toughest and most inevitable things about two streams. People change a lot over their lifetime. The Doctor got lucky the first time he abandoned Amy, as she was never really able to grow up, and he could entice her due to that infatuation still being there. This time, though, that spark is gone. She truly grew up, and that adoration for the Doctor has turned into hatred. Rory is also understandably angry with the Doctor now. They've definitely gotten closer over time, but Rory still isn't afraid to call the Doctor out on the way he lives his life. And now the Doctor has basically turned his wife into a cold, hardened warrior, and denied Rory the life he wanted with her, all because of the reckless way the Doctor travels.
You should look in a history book once in a while, see if there's an outbreak of plague or not.
That is not how I travel.
Then I do not want to travel with you!
Even though Amy hates the Doctor now, she still has a tiny soft spot deep inside for Rory. And this results in the idea that they could rescue younger Amy. This creates another interesting moral dilemma, particularly for older Amy. Her life may be hell, but she spent all that time toughening up, surviving, growing up and adapting to life without the Doctor, and all that growth will be undone if she was never stuck here. She will essentially be killed, and another Amy will grow old instead, an Amy who will never see the Doctor for who he really is, and it's understandable why she wouldn't want the majority of her life erased. The Girl Who Waited shows how Amy's relationship with Rory has progressed since the start. At first, she was non-committal, not properly realizing how lucky she was to have this glorious human. But she's changed since then. She's come to love and appreciate Rory a lot more, and that's shown brilliantly in this scene, as she puts into words how it feels to have that special connection with someone, and it's enough to convince older Amy to help her, on the condition that she gets to come with them, showing how she still had 36 years of another life, and one conversation with herself isn't going to completely undo all that growth. She's learned over time that the universe isn't a fairy tale, yet she still asks for this impossible scenario. This is also where the more manipulative side of the 11th Doctor shows up again, as he lies to Amy and tells her that he can make it a reality, using her as a tool to get things back to the way he wants them to be. And so, with Rory and younger Amy safe, the Doctor slams the door in old Amy's face. Just like how Amy was biased when it came to both Doctors in The Almost People, the Doctor is biased in which Amy he wants to save. Obviously, there's the whole paradox thing, but I think the Doctor just couldn't handle the idea of travelling with a version of Amy who doesn't idealise him. It's a sign of the Doctor's vanity and desire to be adored that gets addressed in the next episode. There's still a look of guilt in the Doctor's eyes, but he can't bring himself to save this older Amy. He doesn't want to have a say in this at all, and leaves Rory to make the difficult decision of which Amy to save. Rory has to essentially leave his wife to die, and the Doctor leaves him to make this decision alone. The Girl Who Waited is so good. It's filled with nuance, a unique and impactful character study. We really see the darker and more manipulative side of the 11th Doctor. The directing is also great. There are lots of standout moments, like this long shot, or the slow motion action scene, or the shot of Amy and Rory pressed against the TARDIS door. This is easily one of my favourite 11th Doctor episodes. It's awesome.
An ancient creature, drenched in the blood of the innocent, drifting in space through an endless shifting maze. For such a creature, death would be a gift, and accept it. I wasn't talking about myself.
The God Complex is my favourite 11th Doctor episode, and is probably in my top 10 episodes of all time. This episode is set in a spaceship disguised as a 1980s hotel, and in keeping with that theme, there's also an alien Minotaur that feeds on faith. Also, the rooms have people's worst fears in them. Must be a Scunthorpe hotel. So yeah, a big theme of this episode is faith. Faith isn't just religion, it comes in many forms, and we see that with the side characters in the episode. each of them having their own belief that drives their existence. Joe is a gambler, his faith is in luck. Howie is a terminally online conspiracy theorist. His belief is that everything in the world is secretly being controlled. Rita is a Muslim, speaks for itself, and Gibbous comes from the most invaded planet in the galaxy, his faith lying in the idea that someone will enslave him. And then there's Amy's faith in the Doctor. That childhood infatuation that never left, that inability to grow up after that one night when she was 7. I think the God Complex is one of the best directed episodes of the entire show. There are so many shots that perfectly convey the weirdness of the situation the characters are in. Be it the Dutch angle, the dolly zoom of the endless repetitive corridor. I also love how we never get a clear shot of the Minotaur until the end, as though our faith in the Doctor is clouding it out. The episode also does a great job of making things feel claustrophobic and chaotic when it needs to, especially when we only see things through the security cameras, but also showing the vastness and labyrinth-like nature of the endless corridors. I genuinely think the writing in this episode is top tier. The dialogue strikes a perfect balance between witty and nuanced, and it's exactly the kind of stuff that comes to mind when I think of the Moffat era. The bit where all the side characters show up is so good. Like, there's so much going on at once, but it's so funny.
No, it's okay, we're not. We surrender. We're nice.
She threatened me with a chair leg.
Who are you?
I've never been threatened with a chair leg before. No, hang on, I tell a lie.
Did you just say it's okay, we're nice?
The comedy mixes well with the somewhat darker overall theme of the episode, and the characters are all really well written. Not a single dialogue line is wasted. Apparently, Toby Whithouse enjoyed writing the God Complex more than his previous episodes, as he prefers writing darker material, and it shows.
Howie had been in speech therapy, he'd just got over this massive stammer. What an achievement, I mean, can you imagine?
I'd forgotten that all victories are about saving the universe.
This is a really sudden moment, but I love it. The episode takes the time to remind you that every victory in your life, however small, is still a victory. Rory might have dismissed Howie as a chronically online loser, but still admired his capability to overcome the setbacks in his life. It shows how life in the TARDIS has changed them, to the point where only saving the universe truly feels like a victory to them all. But victories can come in the most ordinary of things. The side characters are all great, but the best one has to be Rita. I think she's one of the most interesting side characters of the entire show. Her observation and wittiness making her seem like the perfect companion material. And her chemistry with the Doctor is just unmatched.
Oh, she's good. Amy, with regret, you're fired.
What?
I'm kidding.
The episode even makes self-aware comments about how characters the Doctor forms an attachment to are guaranteed to be killed off, almost leading you into a false sense of security, only for Rita to have a genuinely emotional death. I really wish we got more of her, but the fact that this episode can make a side character's death this impactful with only half an hour is pretty damn impressive. As the Doctor turns the camera off just before Rita dies, he notices Gibbous. The genius who could have been his new companion died, and the coward survived. The Doctor clearly dislikes Gibbous, but I think that's because he sees a bit of himself in him. Gibbous is happy to let others die, to put everyone else's life on the line for the sake of himself, something the Doctor does a lot, which causes the deaths of everyone around him, like we just saw. Towards the end, Rita calls out the Doctor's God Complex, how he assumes he can just save everyone. At this point, she knows she's gonna die, so it's a tragic bit of foreshadowing, showing how the Doctor can't always save everyone. And after Rita dies, the Doctor realizes he got it wrong. He assumed the Minotaur fed on fear, but it turns out it feeds on faith. The very thing he told everyone to rely on, not realizing he made everyone easier to kill. All this shows how the Doctor isn't infallible, building up to the ending. Eventually, Amy begins to praise the Minotaur, and as they discover her worst fear is being left waiting for the Doctor again, the Doctor realizes the only way to save her is to kill her faith in him. He needs to own up to who he really is, to admit his most vulnerable insecurities to his best friend, to finally confess that he looks for adoration and used her for that, never allowing her to grow up and move past her infatuation towards him. He finally stops seeing her as that 7-year-old waiting in her garden. This isn't Amelia Pond anymore. This is Amy Williams. She's grown up, and they both need to accept that. We never properly see the Minotaur until the end, as if we need to lose our faith in the Doctor in order to properly embrace its existence. Hence why we only get a proper shot of it after Amy loses her faith. The music playing over this scene is just the icing on the cake. This is such a brilliant emotional scene.
I'm not a hero. I really am just a madman in a box. And it's time we saw each other as we really are. Amy Williams. It's time to stop waiting.
And so, the Doctor drops Amy and Rory at their house. They don't live in a big house in a little village. They don't live in a quaint little cottage in the countryside. They have a proper house. The fairy tale is over. Amy doesn't need her imaginary friend anymore. This is what Amy's arc had been leading to. It makes sense for their adventures to end with Amy growing up. We do see Amy and Rory again in the remaining episodes of the series, and they do come back in Series 7, but the Doctor's relationship with them is never the same after this episode.
Or maybe there's a bigger, scarier adventure waiting for you in there.
This episode has a big impact on the 11th Doctor era as a whole, and this ending scene is just so good. The Doctor is left alone, as his death looms ever closer. The themes of the Doctor losing all his companions were explored in Toby Whithouse's other episodes, School Reunion and The Vampires of Venice, but I think this episode does it in such a great way, actually feeling like a companion departure, and creating a satisfying conclusion to Amy and Rory's arc. I think the God Complex is damn near perfect, and it's just such a great example of why there is no other show quite like Doctor Who. Well, look at that. We've got a pretty great run of episodes here, and the finale is coming up. What's the plan, guys? I think we should make a 2-part finale, allowing this very packed and convoluted series plenty of time to resolve itself. James Corden brain rot sequel. But I really think a series this interwoven could really do with an extended finale. James Corden brain rot sequel. Yeah, this is the first series of the revival to only have a 1-episode finale, because apparently we really needed a sequel to The Lodger. Once again written by Gareth Roberts. Now, my opinion on James Corden is probably the same as most of you, which is why it's annoying that I actually kinda like Craig. We stand Stormageddon though. So apparently around 200 years have passed for the Doctor between now and the God Complex. This is where all those adventures we saw in The Impossible Astronaut fit in, and now he's on a farewell tour before his death. But instead, he gets a job in a department store and finds Cybermen underneath the building. Oh yeah, this is also the second episode in a row to have a Star Trek reference.
What's Lou doing? Klinger?
A teleport, like a beam me up teleport like you see in Star Trek.
I won't lie, I think the Cybermen are heavily underutilized in this episode, which hurts a lot more since they'd already been heavily underutilized in every appearance after their original return, and would continue to be underutilized, arguably until Darkwater, but definitely well enough in time. The Cybermen are my favourite villains, and it hurts to see their uniqueness and potential getting squandered as they pretty much become generic robots. In a light-hearted James Corden comedy episode, no less. Not only that, but they get defeated with the power of love, the same way Craig defeated the bad guys last time. And the same way the Cybermen were defeated last time. Alright, this episode does have some good stuff about it. I also really like the scenes of the Doctor comforting Alfie and telling Craig he's about to die. You could really feel the age and weariness of the Doctor at this point, and I really like it. Also, the ending. It's very disconnected from the rest of the episode, being a setup for the finale, written by Stephen Moffat instead. Honestly, it gets a pass for this shot of Madame Kavarian alone. It's so unsettling. But the whole scene is so good. It's so ominous and really sets the stakes for the finale. So yeah, closing time exists, I guess. I really think a 2-part finale would have worked much better. And with that, we go into the finale. Now, like I said earlier, due to time constraints, the script submitted for this episode was a first draft, which, as you could probably guess, leads to the episode being a bit underdeveloped and a mess. I mean, it's one thing to use a first draft for a lighter, more comedic episode, but for the series finale of a series this convoluted, yeah, it's no wonder things end up feeling unresolved. Okay, in all fairness, the episode starts off pretty strong, as we see what looks like London if it had ADHD. All the stuff like pterodactyls, Winston Churchill being a Roman emperor, Simon Callow also returns as Charles Dickens. Also, holy shit, Stephen Moffat predicted Fortnite. You can tell things are off because Matt Smith has a beard. Seriously, this is so cursed, it feels wrong. The first part of the episode is really cool. the Doctor hacking into the Dalek hive mind and going on a manhunt to find any information on the Silence he can. So, Dorian explains the prophecy of the Doctor's future.
On the fields of Trenzalore, when no living creature can speak falsely or fail to answer, a question will be asked.
Obviously, this makes no sense to us right now, but this is why the Silence want the Doctor dead. They don't want him to make it to Trenzalore and answer the oldest question in the universe. The best scene in the episode is this one, though. The Doctor decides he doesn't have to die, and it almost seems like he's about to go down the Time Lord victorious path again. He decides to phone Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, one of his oldest and most beloved friends, so confident that the rules of time don't apply to him, only to be told that the Brigadier passed away. And just like that, the Doctor is reminded that he can't run forever. He missed the last opportunity to see one of his oldest friends one last time, and it brings him right back to reality. He can't just keep travelling around the universe on a whim, expecting time to bend itself to fit his needs. Time keeps marching on. Not only is this a great way of acknowledging actor Nicholas Courtney, who passed away in 2011, but it also ties in with the Doctor's arc of accepting his death. And so, we see the Doctor's death to the astronaut from his perspective. I really like this callback to the Forest of the Dead.
Time can be rewritten.
Don't you dare.
Time can be rewritten.
Not those times. Not one line. Don't you dare.
Anyway, River doesn't kill the Doctor. There's a US military base in the Pyramids of Giza, because why not? Things happen. This whole part of the episode is about as rushed as I'm making it seem. And the Doctor and River get married, and he dies. In the epilogue, Amy stresses about having killed Madame Kavarian, but River assures her that it was in an aborted timeline, and technically never happened. Which begs the question, what actually happened to her? Because we never see her again. Since this episode technically didn't happen, the last we saw of her was her putting River in the spacesuit, after which she just sort of vanishes. I guess she assumed the job was done. The Silence as a whole takes a major backseat in Series 7, so things end up feeling pretty unresolved here. And the episode ends with the big reveal. The Doctor didn't actually die. It was just the Tesselector disguised as him. Looking past how this is a pretty basic and predictable reveal, all things considered, it has potential as a twist, but the execution of the episode leads to not many people understanding it. I mean, I didn't properly understand it until this year. So if you don't get it and think this ending is cheap and that a fixed point has been ignored, I'll try and explain it. So the date and time of the Doctor's death wasn't for the Doctor. It was for the Tesselector. But because the Tesselector was disguised as the Doctor, the general consensus across the universe was that this was the Doctor's death. Even the Silence believe it was the Doctor who died on the beach. The only people who know the truth are these four and Dorian, hence why River has to go to prison to keep the Doctor's survival a secret. The Doctor found a loophole. He had to be on that beach, but he didn't have to die. We know it was the Tesselector that was meant to die, as the universe corrupts when River doesn't kill it. Now, I still think the way this is communicated is not very good, hence why so many people get confused about this, but I hope my summary has helped you understand this twist better, even if you still think it's dumb. Anyway, the oldest question is apparently Doctor Who? But we don't have to worry about that for at least another half an hour. And with that, the wedding of River Song ends. Yeah. There are some really cool ideas in this episode. Ideas are about the best thing you're going to get when your script is a first draft and you cram a whole finale into one episode, though. I don't fault Moffat for struggling to handle all the projects he was working on at once at this time, but that doesn't stop the episode from being overly stuffed with ideas and just feeling painfully half-baked. This story desperately needed to be 2 parts, and you can see elements of that in the final product, as the first 20 minutes are full of flashbacks, as if the episode is trying to cram an entire first part into such a short time. Series 6 was such an interesting series, the narrative was really cool, and it's a shame that the conclusion had to be rushed, as there was real potential here. Not the worst series finale of the show by a long shot, but still an unfortunately anticlimactic ending. Once again, the series is topped off with a Christmas special. This one being inspired by The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. This episode is a lot smaller scale compared to other Christmas specials, showing how the Doctor is set on living in the shadows. But the opening scene shows that he isn't completely giving up his adventures. The Doctor's energy throughout this episode is similar to A Christmas Carol, largely having the same bouncy, childish attitude, but that iconic wisdom of the character still shows.
Because what's the point in them being happy now if they're going to be sad later? The answer is, of course, because they are going to be sad later.
So this episode is about a woman called Madge and her 2 children. Madge has just found out her husband was killed in World War II, and she's worried about how she's going to tell her kids, because telling them now will ruin Christmas for them, possibly forever. This is a really good narrative to have in a Christmas episode. It could be overly depressing, but there's potential for that classic Smith-era bittersweetness, which we do get as she tells her kids the truth in a pretty emotional moment. But then it turns out he's been saved by the power of love. Look, I get you don't want this to be a depressing Christmas episode, but the main narrative of the episode was the dad's death, and I feel like undoing that also undoes a lot of the emotional value of the episode. Also, the power of love saves the day, because, you know, it's not like that's how the last episode was resolved. Or the one before that. Oh, how is he saved, you may ask? Well, Madge is able to pilot a spaceship and guide his plane to safety. Because she's a cis woman. Yeah, Madge is able to save her husband's life because she was born with a uterus. I don't even have much of a problem with this, I just think it's funny. So yeah, I don't really have much to say about this episode. It's alright, but probably my least favourite Christmas special of the Moffat era. It has good moments, and I like a lot of the emotional value, but I don't know, it's fine for what it is. And with that, Series 6 ends. This series tends to be pretty polarizing. Some people love it, other people are wrong. Nah, but genuinely, I love Series 6. It's one I have a lot of nostalgia for, but even watching it now, it holds up really well. This series has so many great episodes, filled with loads of mysteries and twists. It's a very risky and experimental series, and due to time constraints, not everything lands the way it could, but the more serialized approach and the cinematic feel a lot of the series has makes it a real standout in my opinion. I know a good chunk of the episodes in this series get a lot of flack, but I consider Series 6 to have a pretty strong and memorable run of episodes, with stuff like The Doctor's Wife, The Girl Who Waited, and The God Complex being some of my favourite episodes of the entire show. Series 6 takes more time to focus on the characters and their arcs than Series 5 did. I like the Doctor's arc as he becomes darker compared to the previous series, having more serious moments and even having his power and influence put into question in episodes like A Good Man Goes to War and The Wedding of River Song. One of the main things Matt Smith gets praised for with his portrayal of the Doctor is, despite being the youngest actor to play the role, he conveys the age and weariness and wisdom of the character incredibly. And I think that aspect of his portrayal becomes a lot more apparent in this series. I like Amy a lot more in Series 6 compared to Series 5. She's learned to appreciate Rory after the last series, and Series 6 more or less completely scraps the fairy tale vibe, and hits Amy on the head repeatedly with cold hard reality. Towards the end of the series, her full-time adventures with the Doctor come to an end, as she grows up, moves on from her imaginary friend, and settles down for a regular life with Rory. Which, if you ask me, is the perfect ending to her story. I sure am glad that's where it ends. Also, Rory's development is awesome too. He retains his comic relief and more apathetic side, but he's clearly grown in confidence while travelling in the TARDIS, and while he may have gotten closer to the Doctor over time, still isn't afraid to call him out when necessary, further proving that he is such a Chad and why you should absolutely be in love with him. The Series 6 dynamic is easily one of the best of the entire show in my opinion. The 3 main characters bouncing off each other so easily, clearly all being good friends with layers of nuance to keep things fresh. River gets much more of a major role in this series, and while I think her innuendos can be a bit much, it's great seeing her develop over the series in a weird order. So yeah, like I said, Series 6 has a bit of a love it or hate it kind of thing, and I'm in the love it crowd. I love the step up in maturity from Series 5 with more complex and unique storylines. The ending is definitely rushed and kinda unsatisfying, but that doesn't stop the rest of the series from being pretty strong overall. And with that, we move on to Series 7, the 11th Doctor's final series. This is the first series of the show I remember actively anticipating. I'd watched Series 5 and 6 as they aired, but at this point I'd gone back and watched the whole RTD era and had officially developed Doctor Who autism. It's a very serious condition, I still have it now. I was super excited for both parts of this series, and nowadays, if we're being completely honest, I don't really rate it. It's got some really good episodes, don't get me wrong, but as a whole, I feel like there's a noticeable step down compared to what came before. Now, there are once again factors to take into account when talking about this series. Stephen Moffat still had Sherlock to handle, as well as the rapidly approaching 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. A lot of focus went into the anniversary, which led to a lot of Series 7 being sacrificed. Series 7 was split into 2 parts, the first 6 episodes airing in 2012, and the rest airing in 2013. There were a few reasons for this split, such as trying to avoid the show clashing with the London Olympics, and to lighten the load slightly for the anniversary year. The first half of the series consists of 5 big, bombastic, cinematic episodes, with the intent of writing the Ponds out of the show for good. Oh, there was also the Pond Life minisode set before the series begins, where the Doctor encourages using the Ood for slavery.
He's conditioned to serve. You know, the best thing is, let him do just that.
I didn't like that. I mean, fundamentally, I don't really like the way this series is structured. Like, Amy and Rory already had their exit in Series 6, Amy finally growing up and living her life without the Doctor. It was exactly where their story was headed. But Series 7 brings them back, gives them this sudden divorce narrative that goes nowhere, and that's about it. Like I said, their relationship with the Doctor is never the same after the God Complex, and I like that that's continued here, but it just feels like this time could have been better spent developing the character of Clara further. And with the Doctor being alone a lot more now, a darker, less merciful side of him is starting to show. Honestly, the difference in the Doctor's attitude and maturity compared to Series 5 is very stark. The childlike, whimsical side of him almost never showing up. He just feels so much older and wearier, and I like this new direction for the character. But how do the episodes themselves hold up? Well, let's find out. If there's one way I'd describe Asylum of the Daleks, it would be style over substance. Actually, that applies to most of Series 7A, but still, all the episodes in 7A were marketed as these big-budget movies, all having posters and ting. And if you want a good-looking, action-packed episode of Doctor Who, well, this is the episode for you. But if you actually start to think about the stuff going on in this episode, it falls apart pretty quickly. So, firstly, why do the Daleks have an asylum? I know the episode tries to explain it at the start, but why do the Daleks have an asylum? Seriously, the one constant we've seen with these guys is their obsession with purity. They will not hesitate to kill any Daleks they deem impure, unless those impure Daleks can serve a purpose. Why would they keep insane and broken Daleks alive? Also, was this asylum just always here? All that time after the Time War, when the Daleks were scavengers, only a few left in the universe, and that whole time this place was just there? Filled with loads of Daleks? Speaking of which, remember the last time the Doctor properly encountered the Daleks?
And I am yours!
Of course you do. Where has that disdain gone? Every single time the Daleks had appeared in the show at this point, the Doctor was unable to contain his sheer hatred towards them. Now, the Daleks are well and truly back. Look at this. This is the Doctor's worst nightmare for the last 7 series come true. How does he react?
Well, this is new.
Oh, he just kind of shrugs it off. Sorry, I just refuse to believe the Doctor would be this apathetic towards the Daleks reforming into an empire again, due to his own decisions. Also, why do the Daleks have a parliament? Literally everyone in this room thinks the exact same thing as each other. What use would they have for democracy? What are they debating?
Man, I sure do hate literally everyone except us. Oh wow, me too. Damn, we should start a movement where we kill everyone in the universe. We already do. Your mom.
There's also the plotline of Amy and Rory's divorce. This is pretty sudden, I won't lie, but I can sort of see this being a thing. It kind of goes against Amy and Rory's journey throughout Series 5 and 6, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Amy decides to divorce Rory because she can't have kids due to whatever happened at Demon's Run. Rory has always wanted kids, but she can't have them, so she decides the best thing to do was give him up, because she can't give him what he wants. Man, this is a really tragic and interesting direction to take these characters, and it makes sense for these more realistic struggles to emerge as they mature and become more accustomed to normal life. I can't wait to see how this unfolds over the series. Oh, they're back together like nothing happened. Okay then. The main thing this episode has going for it is the surprise inclusion of Jenna Coleman. It was already known she'd be replacing Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill as the new companion, but her showing up so soon was definitely a cool surprise. Oswin is an interesting character, and I do like the twist of her being a Dalek. I mean, the clues were there all along, so it does genuinely make for a really good surprise. And then she dies. What? I mean, she's no Rita, but her chemistry with the main trio is great, and she does give off companion vibes, as well as setting up the mystery of Jenna Coleman's character for the rest of the series. And then the episode ends with Oswin erasing all the Daleks' knowledge of the Doctor. Wow, what a cool subversion of things. I sure hope this plot point sticks around for a while. Asylum of the Daleks has some really cool ideas. I mean, the Daleks asking the Doctor for help already has so much potential for a great story. The episode looks great, the pacing is good, and there are some really good scenes, particularly towards the end, like the Doctor being swarmed by the insane Daleks, or the Oswin reveal. Unfortunately, the episode gets bogged down by having so many things that just make no sense, and ideas that feel pretty unexplored. The whole story of Oswin does a lot of heavy lifting for the episode, I'll be honest. Also, I feel like I had to mention these opening titles at some point. They decided to give every episode of 7A a different filter and a different texture for the logo, and I get it's to give all the episodes their own standalone feel, but I'm just not really a fan of it. The filters just look pretty ugly a lot of the time, and I think it really sucks that they made the DW in the logo that changes into the TARDIS a separate thing. I think that logo is just so iconic, you cannot split it up like that. Alright, I'll be completely honest. I'd never properly rewatched Dinosaurs on a Spaceship since it broadcast in 2012, so I went into this episode with a pretty fresh perspective. I mean, I'd heard mixed things about it. Some people hate it, some people defend it as a silly fun adventure. Where do I fit on this spectrum? Neither, but both sides are wrong. This episode is just kind of bland. Yeah, to be honest, watching this episode, I just got this constant sense of mundanity. I wasn't bored watching it, but I also wasn't hooked or incredibly invested at any point. The episode seems like the title was made before the plot, and that's because it was. The side characters for this episode are Nefertiti and John Riddell, who I don't think was an actual person from history, as I literally can't find anything about him online. Either that or he really is just incredibly irrelevant. These characters just sort of exist. There's really not much to them outside of their basic traits. Nefertiti is a strong woman who'll gladly kill any man who tries to mess with her, only for her to never actually do that. And Riddell likes killing animals and being a misogynist. There's also the two robots, which were literally reused props from a CBBC show, voiced by David Mitchell and Robert Webb. Silly, sarcastic robots are a good idea, very Moffat-y, but considering they're mainly meant to be comic relief, they aren't really that comical. Not the first time a comedian's potential has been wasted on this show, and it won't be the last. Bland characters without much nuance. I wonder who wrote this episode. Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't matter. I mean, just generally, the episode feels overstuffed, like it's trying too hard to be random, and that just leaves things feeling underdeveloped. Wait, who wrote this episode again? It doesn't matter. Oh hey, there's also an incessant inclusion of a countdown to help make the story happen. Okay, who actually wrote that? Oh, that explains a lot.
Rory!
Guys, don't show this to the anti-woke crowd. They still think Chris Chibnall didn't invent homosexuality until 2018. As well as politics.
This episode introduces Rory's dad, Brian, and if there's one thing you can always trust Doctor Who to get right, it's granddad-like figures. He brings a sense of ordinariness to the dynamic, which is ironic because he's genuinely the most nuanced side character in the episode. He does get kind of forgotten about towards the end of the episode though, which is a shame. Also, why was he not at Amy and Rory's wedding? This episode is also the start of the darker path the Doctor is beginning to go down now he isn't consistently travelling with Amy and Rory, as the episode ends with him just leaving the main villain to die. I mean, Solomon was clearly a big meanie head who killed all the Silurians, but all the same, you wouldn't expect the Doctor to just leave him to die like that. This merciless side of the Doctor fits with the clearly darker path he's starting to go down, and this aspect gets expanded on in the following episode. Another thing this episode discusses, which I like, is Amy and Rory's life without the Doctor. Amy is apparently struggling to hold down a job because she still can't stop waiting for the Doctor, especially now he's visiting them less frequently. Amy's biggest fear is being left waiting for the Doctor, and we've seen how much that can change her. So even though she's continuing to drift apart from the Doctor, that fear still remains.
You'll be there till the end of me.
Or vice versa.
So yeah, I like the character aspects of this episode, and Brian. Other than that, it's pretty unremarkable, all things considered. You know, it's exactly what it says on the tin, so mission accomplished, I guess? Alright, A Town Called Mercy is an absolute banger. Easily the best episode of Series 7A, as we get a Western-inspired episode that really challenges the Doctor's morals, with a brilliantly tense and nuanced plot. I think this episode is criminally overlooked, so here I am, to look at it. Something you'll notice about this episode is it is very Western, even being filmed in the same location in Spain where a lot of classic Western films were shot. The episode wears its inspirations on its sleeve, making self-aware moments and jokes based on stereotypes in Western movies, and I think it works. A lot of those films had a cheesy, low-budget feel to them, similar to Doctor Who, so it makes sense that the two would mesh together pretty smoothly. I love how the Doctor is thrown out of the town immediately after entering. He just swaggers into the bar, all excited and happy-go-lucky, only for his whole confidence to be pushed to its limit as he's left completely helpless to whatever is out there that scares the residents so much. It makes it clear straight away that this isn't just gonna be a simple adventure for the Doctor. He's gonna be pushed to his limits here, whether he likes it or not. Our first impressions of Carla Jex and the Gunslinger are very simple. In a good way. Carla Jex is portrayed as this genius hero who gave this town power and medicine out of the kindness of his heart, while the Gunslinger is painted as this evil guy who started terrorizing this town for seemingly no reason. The portrayal here is very one-sided, which makes the twist that Jex isn't all that great a lot more impactful, as well as making the Gunslinger a lot more nuanced and interesting as a character. The conversation between Amy and Jex hits a lot harder on rewatch when you know what he's alluding to here.
But I've already given everything I have to the Carla. All that was good in me. Could remember myself and help people.
Are you a father?
In a way, I suppose I am.
So, the Doctor discovers that Jex experimented on his own people, torturing them and using them like lab rats until he created the perfect weapon. I genuinely think this is one of the best moral dilemmas the show has ever created. Obviously, Jex using other people like tools is bad, but like he says, his race was locked in an endless war, countless members of his species already dead. Creating cyborgs was his only option. It was either that or watch the rest of his race fight to the death. It's clear he isn't proud of this, but he'll still defend it as an act of desperation. And this adds a whole new layer to the Gunslinger. He isn't just some cyborg terrorizing a village. He wants revenge against the scientists who killed many of his people, and essentially ruined the lives of himself and many others. Both sides have valid reasons for their actions, and both are represented well here, really leaving it up to the interpretation of the viewer as to who deserves the closure they both seek. This moral dilemma breaks the Doctor. He obviously doesn't condone Jex's actions, but he also had to resort to extreme measures during the Time War, something which still overwhelms him with guilt to this day. The Doctor clearly doesn't like people who remind him of his darker, more manipulative side, as we've seen with characters like Jenny, Gibbis, or Danny Pink in the following series. And Jex just fully calls out the Doctor's insecurity here, sensing the guilt and anger of a former soldier who also did what he had to do to save his race from a living hell. The Doctor's mercy completely disappears here, as he throws Jex out of the town, even pointing a gun at him to stop him from coming back. He's fully prepared to sacrifice Jex for the sake of this town, believing it to be justified. Yet another sign of him losing his compassion due to travelling alone for so long, something Amy calls out.
See, this is what happens when you travel alone for too long.
This situation with Jex is really the straw that broke the camel's back, as he's tired of showing mercy towards mass murderers he considers irredeemable.
Today, I honour the victims first. His, the Masters, the Daleks, all the people who died because of my mercy.
But Amy reminds him of who he is. If he sends Jex off to his death, does that really make him the better person? The Doctor is all about finding the best way out of a situation. His name is a promise to never be cruel or cowardly, and he seems to be forgetting that, showing why he needs someone, and what could happen if he's left alone for too long. The Doctor's actions inadvertently get Isaac, the sheriff, killed, and so the Doctor feels a need to stick to his dying wish of keeping Jex alive, even if they still really don't get along. But the episode ends with Jex accepting responsibility for those he wronged, blowing himself up and ending the war. A brave act showing how he still had morality and accountability. And the Gunslinger gets his own new purpose, using his powers to protect Mercy. A Town Called Mercy is such a great episode. The episode leans into the Western tropes it's clearly based on while subverting them in good ways. It contains a really powerful and nuanced narrative that challenges the Doctor and the path he's heading down now that Amy and Rory are drifting out of his life. My only real complaint is that Amy and particularly Rory don't really have anything to do in this episode. Otherwise, a brilliant and incredibly overlooked story with a nuanced narrative. After this, we get The Power of Three, an episode that properly explores the double life of Amy and Rory, and how real life is taking over from life with the Doctor. Even though the plot of this episode makes no sense, I like the focus on the characters that this episode brings. So let's just get the plot out of the way. A bunch of cubes drop onto Earth one day, then a year later they start killing people, all to prevent the human race from traveling to space and colonizing it. This seems like an overly convoluted plan, considering the cubes can literally just fly around and attack and kill people. Also, I kind of have to mention the ending. I know the ending had to be hastily rewritten because the bloke playing the Shakri refused to cooperate, but it's still a rushed and pointless ending nonetheless. There's all this build-up about the Shakri and the tally, only for the show to never bring this stuff up again, and we just never figure out what this stuff means. Also, I have to bring this up purely because it bothers me. The cubes kill people by switching off their hearts. Before the Doctor switches them back on, he has to get from the Tower of London to a hospital, enter a spaceship, have a conversation with the propaganda poster, and then save everyone. Now, let's say, best case scenario, Rory works at the Royal London Hospital, the nearest hospital to the Tower of London, about a 10-minute drive. Let's say they get there in 7 or 8 minutes by speeding, and also because the roads will probably not be super active due to everyone suffering cardiac arrest. By this point, chances of survival are already low, and we've still got another few minutes to go here. By 10 minutes, the victim's chances of survival are just 10%, and even if they do survive, they'll very likely have permanent brain damage. So, realistically, a very large percentage of Earth's population either died or had significant brain damage after this. This is how far I will go to prove Chibnall bad. But there's also the return of UNIT, which hadn't really had much of a presence in the modern show until this point, and had become a mostly military organisation. But with the help of Kate Stewart, daughter of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, they've become more science-focused again. This was Kate's first appearance in the show, but there was a home video called Downtime, released in 1995, where we discover that the Brigadier has a daughter called Kate. Apparently, Chris Chibnall didn't know about this, and the fact that he also created a character called Kate, who's the Brigadier's daughter, was just a coincidence. I'm not being sarcastic or anything, that's just genuinely funny.
Where's the Doctor?
On the way again.
Second set, Doctor!
Who do you guys think the Doctor would main in Mario Kart Wii? My money's on Rosalina. The best aspect of this episode is the focus on Amy and Rory's relationship with the Doctor. This episode properly explores the life Amy and Rory are starting to commit to, something the Doctor can't comprehend or tolerate himself. I also like the development of Amy's career as she's matured. She went from a kissogram at the start, then a model, and now she writes articles about travel destinations. You can see the step up in aspiration and maturity as she stops spending her life just waiting for the Doctor. But the fact that she now reviews places to travel shows how she's still using her adventures with the Doctor in real life. And then there's this scene. Oh my god, this is one of the best moments of the entire 11th Doctor era. I'm gonna be honest, I was so sure Stephen Moffat had to have written this and inserted it into the episode. But no, apparently Chibnall wrote this, which was a very pleasant surprise. It just fully delves into the state of the Doctor and Amy's friendship, how Amy just can't live both lives, and she wants to commit to her real life. Her whole reason for running away in Series 5 was to avoid real life. So once again, we see just how much she's grown since then. But the Doctor's speech about how big and amazing the universe is just so powerful, as he compares things in the universe fading away to Amy and Rory fading away from his life. He wants to make the most of all the wonderful things in the universe, including his best friends. And he knows they're moving on, but he just can't give them up, because Amy was the first face he saw after regenerating. Not only does this explain why the Doctor can't let go of the Ponds, but also why the 10th Doctor couldn't let go of Rose. 10 and 11 may be different levels of wacky and alien, but they're both incredibly emotional and compassionate Doctors, and it makes total sense for them to feel a great attachment to the people who've been with them from the start. Oh yeah, also Brian is here again. And I like him a lot more here. He has more to do, and he's just overall a lot funnier, perhaps aided by him being more in his element than he was in Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. He's not afraid to question the Doctor's reckless adventuring and the danger he puts people in, resulting in the Doctor opening up and being surprisingly honest about what happened to his former companions. Because the fact is, you don't embrace life in the TARDIS without it changing you, either by killing you or permanently changing your life in some way. He still keeps whisking Amy and Rory away on adventures, wanting to make the most of his time with them because he knows it's running out, while also knowing the risks that could come with those adventures. The whole series thus far has been hinting at the idea of Amy and Rory leaving the Doctor, but this episode reminds you that it may not end up just being them moving on. And with that, we enter Amy and Rory's final outing. The Angels Take Manhattan. A very timey-wimey and incredibly emotional episode that, for all its flaws, gets a pass purely because of how it fundamentally changed 8-year-old me as a person and still makes me cry like a bitch now. The last 2.5 series concludes with an action-packed send-off of one of the most iconic TARDIS teams, with Stephen Moffat, Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill all agreeing that their send-off should be permanent, making sure there was no chance of them coming back in the future to undercut their departure. Even though their very existence in Series 7 kinda undercuts their departure at the end of the God Complex, the episode starts with the three of them just vibing in New York. Oh yeah, this episode was actually shot in New York, unlike last time. I like that we see them just chilling together one last time, blissfully unaware of what's about to happen. The close relationship between the Doctor and the Ponds was a staple part of their dynamic, and this scene shows that that dynamic has never really gone anywhere, even if they hang out less now. This episode also gives some new lore about the Weeping Angels, most of which I like. We find out in this episode that they can take over statues. The ending of Blink basically solidified the Angels' iconic status with a bunch of shots implying that any statue could secretly be an angel. And this episode expands on that. The idea that angels can take over statues is such a cool concept, because it still leaves a lot of mystery around them and how they work. Like, how do they take over statues? Are they just formless consciousnesses floating around the void until they possess a statue? Can they transfer between statues like Mario Odyssey? It still leaves a lot open to interpretation, and if anything, adds more mystery into how they work. But then, there's this. The Statue of Liberty being an angel. Yeah, it looks cool, I get that, but why? How? What? How is arguably the most famous statue in the world just able to travel across New York City without worldwide panic, just for it to stand next to a building and scare people? My headcanon is it's just a projection designed to scare people, because otherwise, if the image of an angel becomes an angel, well, I think the whole world may be in trouble. The angels are surprisingly evil in this episode. Their method of attack is usually a hit and run, zapping you back in the past and feeding off that one bit of potential energy. But it turns out they've created a farm to keep feeding on the people they take, keeping them in the same place for the rest of their lives. It actually makes me think of the song Hotel California, this place that drains your spirit that you can never leave. It's a surprisingly sinister operation from the usually opportunistic Weeping Angels. The plot of this episode is largely controlled by the book the Doctor is reading, written by River Song, which is just the adventure they're having in real time. This is a really cool idea, the characters having this powerful tool that could seal their fates if they just get a little too curious. Even something as simple as chapter titles, which they assumed would be spoiler-free, basically cement that something will happen to Amy. I know some people say this makes no sense, that things being written down hasn't stopped them being altered in the past, but the Doctor literally explains it in the episode.
This isn't any old future, Amy, it's ours.
The book being their definitive future also sets up the plot point of the Doctor being unable to save Amy and Rory once their names are written on that gravestone. This episode has a strong recurring theme of the inevitability of death and the passage of time, so I don't think Amy and Rory's deaths at the end feel cheap or nonsensical given the context of the episode. Also, I feel like I kinda have to mention Mr. Grail, this rich guy who captures and tortures alien things he doesn't understand. There are definitely a lot of similarities to Henry Van Staten from Dalek, but I think they feel different enough that I didn't even notice these similarities until I properly thought about it. Mr. Grail has more of a sinister mafia boss feel to him, whereas Van Staten was just Elon Musk. It's towards the end here that things get really heavy. As Rory watches himself die, his whole life spent living in that one room, his only way to possibly save himself is to jump off the roof. Yeah, this episode is really quite grim. But wait, there's more. As Amy decides to jump with him, all that time he spent dying over and over again for her, and she finally returns the favor, because she couldn't take the risk of waking up to him still being dead.
What the hell are you doing?
The sheer panic in the Doctor's voice there genuinely gives me chills. This scene is so good, already enough to make me cry. But then, the sick, twisted villain known as Moffat gives us one last glimpse of happiness, almost making it seem like everything is fine, until Rory goes back to look at his gravestone, and I'm just left feeling like that Interstellar scene. I won't lie, the fact that Rory was just cast aside here is criminal, but oh my god, this scene breaks me like a fucking twig every time. Just everything, the emotion, the music, the performances. This is one of the most emotional and powerful scenes in the entire show. Such a deservedly impactful send-off to a brilliant companion. Her time with the Doctor still ends with her choosing Rory over him, so it still serves as a great payoff to her arc. And I don't know, man, I'm too busy crying at this point to care. This was the first proper loss I experienced when watching this show, and it still hits me like a truck 12 years on. 12 years, Jesus Christ. Oh, you think we're done? No, the Doctor goes back to find the last page of the book that he ripped out, discovering an afterword Amy wrote for him, reminding him not to be alone, and assuring him they both lived good lives. But there's one final thing. There was a shot towards the end of the 11th hour of young Amy the day after the Doctor showed up, still waiting for him. This is implied to be a dream Amy was having, but it turns out to be real. The Doctor really went back and told her about all the adventures they'd have, something Moffat was waiting to pay off from the start. The story of Amelia Pond is over, but we're all stories in the end. And you know what? It was the best. So, to conclude, Stephen Moffat, I will be invoicing you for my therapy. The episode may have its flaws, but I definitely consider it a powerful and heartbreaking ending for Amy and Rory. Once again, keeping in line with that classic Smith-era bittersweetness. Oh, there was also a postscript of a scene that was never shot, where Amy and Rory's son visits Brian in the present day to tell him what happened to them. Another surprisingly good piece from Chris Chibnall. To bridge the gap between the two parts of Series 7, we get the Snowmen, setting up the main mystery of the rest of the series. Clara. At this point, the Doctor has retired, so struck by grief from losing the absolutely perfect Rory that he spends his whole time brooding, changing the TARDIS console and abandoning the brown tweed jacket, and even the bow tie, in exchange for more darker and dull clothes. He really just doesn't care anymore. And it makes sense. He'd been with Amy and Rory for so long. They and River were arguably the closest the Doctor ever got to having a family since running from Gallifrey. Like he said in The Power of Three, he grew a strong emotional attachment to the first person he saw. And his friendship with Amy and Rory was a massive part of his life for this entire incarnation thus far. So without them, he feels lost. The idea of the Doctor retiring was conceived towards the end of the Fourth Doctor era, but this special finally makes that idea a reality, in a suitable way. The Doctor feeling so weary and beaten down, and even though he'd started getting darker in Series 7, this sudden change is still striking. Oh yeah, Vastra, Jenny, and Strax are all back. I love these guys. Also, Strax is back from the dead, which is just not really explained in the episode for some reason. You have to watch a whole other minisode to find out what happened. The three of them do detective work around Victorian London, solving crimes and mysteries and stuff, which we did see when they first appeared in the show. They're far from the first people to make their own alien hunter group after being inspired by the Doctor, and it shows that his influence still remains, even if he's supposedly retired. It's also confirmed that canonically, the stories of Sherlock Holmes are based on Vastra and Jenny.
History's a whitewash.
Also, I just want to get this out the way, I will not tolerate Strax slander in the comments. Please don't say mean things about him, I like him. Seriously though, you cannot watch the memory worm scene and tell me you don't like this character or his chemistry with the Doctor. The Paternoster gang can usually cope on their own, but now they're up against the evil Dr. Simeon, whose life was changed as a child when an alien dropped out of the sky and ended up influencing his whole life. Wait a minute, the gang are out of their depth, but the Doctor is refusing to help them. So you're just left waiting for the miracle they're praying for. Hey, wait a minute. That's Oswin from the Dalek Asylum. But she died. Yeah, this episode introduces us to the totally brand new character of Clara, who in this episode is living a double life. I get it. The original plan was for Victorian Clara to be the Doctor's new companion, but then they realized that writing for a character so out of time would be a bit of a nightmare, so they scrapped that. Now, I'm with a lot of the people who say that we need more companions who aren't just from modern day Earth, but I feel like you would probably need a modern day companion as well to keep things as relatable as possible for the audience. A lot of people say Victorian Clara was more interesting than modern day Clara, but that's because she's a version of Clara from the end of Series 7, when she's grown in confidence. And yes, Clara does have character development in Series 7, but we'll get to that in a bit. Regardless, Clara's inquisitiveness and determination in this episode are great. She's very witty and clever, and you can feel the Doctor's connection with her develop naturally, to the point where she literally brings him out of retirement, and it feels earned. Even though the Doctor is dead set on staying out of trouble, he can't help getting involved once his curiosity is piqued, investigating Dr. Simeon's lair while dressed as Sherlock Holmes, doing the same in-depth analysis and observation that we've seen from the Doctor before. Fun fact, Matt Smith auditioned for Watson in BBC Sherlock, but Moffat felt like his eccentricity would be more suited for Holmes himself, but the role had already been given to Benedict Cumberbatch. The Doctor can't help but get involved once he's been set off, instinctively falling back into his old habits because he just can't hide from who he truly is, shown with simple stuff like how he put a bow tie on without realizing. The Doctor's home being a cloud in the sky with a magical invisible staircase is really cool and fitting for the character. The visuals are so ethereal, the mist adding an otherworldly feel, and I love it. Also, this is one of the best companion entering the TARDIS scenes ever. It goes so hard. The main villain of the episode is the Great Intelligence, a villain who appeared a couple of times in the second Doctor era. I mean, with the 50th anniversary approaching, it makes sense to want to bring back more old villains, but a lot of the main ones had already been resurrected, so this is what we get. The way he basically stole Dr. Simeon's life by controlling him since he was a child is really tragic. Also, the episode ends up being a prequel to one of those second Doctor stories, as the 11th Doctor plants the idea of the London Underground in 1967 in the Intelligence's mind. I like the moments of Clara proving herself to the Doctor, showing how she knows his plan, whittling down his coldness until she fully brings him out of retirement, only for her to immediately die. Again, but not before saving his life by melting the snow with the power of Christmas. I mean, this is pretty much a staple for Moffat Christmas specials at this point, and it works, because we'd already been shown the power the mind had over the snow. And pretty much all of the episode's main villains have something to do with thoughts and bad dreams and stuff. And then the Doctor realizes he met the same woman twice, and she died both times. Whoever this Clara woman is, she was powerful enough to bring him out of retirement, and keeps showing up and saving his life. And so he completely abandons his secluded life and devotes himself to finding out who she is, thus beginning the main arc of Series 7B. So yeah, Clara joins the 11th Doctor full-time for the second half of Series 7. Honestly, I like 7B more than 7A, but for the most part, a lot of the episodes are just kind of mid. Now, there are a few episodes here which I adore and will defend with my life, but other than that, the majority of the episodes are just kind of alright. They're fine episodes, but there's not much that really stands out to me. The Doctor's personality in Series 7B is a mixed bag. On one half, we've still got a darker and more mature Doctor, his new purple variation of his old clothes reflecting that, while still conveying his alien eccentricity and showing that this is still the same Doctor underneath it all. I like his new attitude in this series, but he's also a bit, I don't know if horny is the right word, but it kinda is. Now, I'm a firm believer that the Doctor is, and always has been, asexual.
Show me your moves.
Rose, I'm trying to resonate concrete.
That doesn't mean they can't have romance in their life, but I cannot accept the Doctor being horny, I'm sorry. Like, there's the Doctor kissing people he likes, and then there's the Doctor kissing a married lesbian without her consent. I don't like that. You've also got Clara, the mystery the Doctor is obsessed with solving. A lot of people say Clara has no personality in Series 7, and while I do definitely think she gets a lot more interesting in Series 8 and 9, I don't think it's fair to say she had zero character. For example, she's very caring, always putting the needs of others above her own. We see that at the start, when it turns out she put her own dreams and ambitions on hold to be there for a family she's friends with. And then in the second episode, she gives up the last reminder of her mum just to save a kid she barely knows. She also has good chemistry with the Doctor, the two of them having a sassy but loving relationship. The Doctor is infatuated with Clara and is very protective of her, and she's always there to pick him up when he falls. But this deep connection they have, and almost reliance they have on each other, kinda sows the seeds of the toxic relationship they develop later on, resulting in the hybrid in Series 9. Oh yeah, also, new opening titles. You know what? I like these ones. They mostly abandon the whole time vortex thing that the entire revived show had used up to this point, instead going for an 80s style zoom through space. It's very stylish and I like it. I know literally everyone hates the TARDIS doors opening at the end. My main problem is that they open outward. Why? Even if we ignore that that's just not how the TARDIS doors work, it just doesn't look good or make sense for them to open outward. The TARDIS is literally right in our face here. How are the doors opening without smacking us in the face? Similar to Series 7A, 7B tells a lot of standalone cinematic stories, each one being wildly different. I will say the variety is great, going from Black Mirror style modern day Earth action to an alien asteroid to a Soviet submarine to a haunted house to the TARDIS to No Go Away to a big moon base. Not only that, but the episodes look fantastic. The Rings of Akhaten and The Day of the Doctor in particular having some great visuals. We start with the Bells of St. John, establishing the Doctor and Clara's relationship and seeding the Great Intelligence as a recurring villain, as he once again takes a child and manipulates their entire life around him. The episode reusing that surprisingly dark plot point from the Snowmen in a way that's different. The episode does have some cool ideas, like Miss Kislet being able to control her employees' minds and opinions.
I'm never so fond of Alexei, but my conscience says we should probably kill him.
Actually, he's about to go on holiday. Kill him when he gets back. Let's not be unreasonable.
And the Doctor's seriousness when he goes to confront them after they take Clara, not even engaging with the witty comments Kislet makes, is very badass. Also, look who wrote the book Summer Falls. Moffat, I swear to God.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save up to £240 for a family of 4.
Cold War brings back the Ice Warriors, another second Doctor villain, who finally got rid of those Lego claws that they had for some reason. The episode serves as a Cold War allegory. During the Cold War, with the crew and the Ice Warriors locked in a stalemate of mutually assured destruction. Skaldak is pretty cool in this episode, taking down the crew members like the Lone Dalek in Series 1. I just don't get why you'd bring back the Ice Warriors, only for it to spend most of the episode out of its armor. Hyde has elements of a full-on haunted house horror episode, with a ghost and a really creepy monster. But it also takes time to focus on the characters. Emma warning Clara about the Doctor's ulterior motives, how he still has his suspicions about her, thinking she might be a trick. It also fully embraces the mini feud between Clara and the TARDIS that's been brewing so far, Clara having an argument with herself, which is pretty funny. The episode does have some weird moments though, like the Doctor reading this guy's Wikipedia page to him, you know, in lieu of us actually finding out this stuff naturally. And there's the whole love story twist at the end, which doesn't really add anything to the episode. Journey to the center of the TARDIS is kind of bogged down by boring or downright unlikable side characters, but it is cool to see a lot of the TARDIS for once. This episode was inspired by the 1978 episode The Invasion of Time, where the final part involved the Doctor running from Sontarans through the TARDIS, which was definitely not just an abandoned hospital. The time distortion shenanigans are fitting and creepy. There is good tension with the time zombies, and the Doctor's angry and manipulative side shows, as he fully interrogates Clara on who she is. The episode has some great visuals, like the blur and distortion when the time zombies are on screen, making things feel claustrophobic and wrong. And I really like the almost psychopathic side of the Doctor we see here, his obsession with Clara literally driving him crazy. Right, you know when you're a kid and you just like everything you watch? Well, I remember when the Crimson Horror came out, and even as an 8-year-old who liked everything, I was left thinking, That was weird. I didn't like that. Why did that exist? As it stands, this episode is a stinky piece of poop and it stinks a lot and I really don't like it and it is uninvited to my birthday party forever and Nightmare in Silver is a painful one too. This episode was meant to be a two-parter, but writer Neil Gaiman was told quite late into production that it could only be one part. And it shows. There were also so many changes made to his script to the point where it was barely his episode anymore. The original script was published online not too long ago, and it definitely seems a lot better than what we got. This episode brings back the Cybermen with a new design, which, if I'm honest, is a little too robotic and detached from the whole humans augmenting themselves to survive thing. Also, the main problem. They're too OP. Seriously, what's the point if they're literally just gonna regenerate themselves and be completely unfazed by any attacks thrown their way? The episode's highlight is, of course, the interactions between the Doctor and Mr. Clever. The Doctor essentially at war with himself. The double role here is fantastic. Matt Smith giving a great performance, the cinematography in his own mind being really distinctive and psychedelic. This dive into the Doctor's mind and true deconstruction of his darker side is very fitting at this point in the 11th Doctor's arc. His manipulative attitudes being fully called out to the point where you often struggle to tell whether it's really the Doctor or the Cyberplanner talking. Alright, I've gone through all of Series 7B for that one person who genuinely wanted me to. Now for the one episode I will genuinely defend until the day I die. I love the Rings of Akhaten. It is such an underrated episode. And no, I don't just love it for the Doctor's speech, it genuinely has a lot going for it other than that. The episode starts with the backstory of Clara, how her parents met, all while the Doctor watches in the background. There's a big emphasis here on the importance of ordinary things and the power of coincidence, because that applies to all of us. At the risk of giving some of you an existential crisis, we're all here now because of a 1 in a billion chance happening in just the right order a million times over to make us who and what and where we are. There are an infinite amount of unlived futures out there where just one seemingly insignificant thing went different, and you never made that lifelong friend, or got that job, or developed an obsessive lifelong interest in that cheesy sci-fi TV show, and that's what this episode is all about. The uniqueness of our lives and the power of coincidence and sentimental value. Also, Clara's mum died on the 5th of March 2005, which is apparently the same day as the Auton attack in Rose. So there is a genuine chance Clara's mum was killed by the Autons. Something I love, mainly from the first part of this episode, but it definitely exists across the whole thing, is the Doctor and Clara's chemistry. This is Clara's first proper time in the TARDIS, but her attitude and behaviour is just so ordinary and relatable.
What do you want to see?
I don't know. Do you know when somebody asks you what's your favourite book and straight away you forget every single book that you've ever read?
She seems like a pretty regular, everyday person, contrasting with the clear mystery surrounding her, but she and the Doctor still get along really well, sharing witty comments throughout the episode and making a great team overall.
Did you just lock us in?
Yep.
With the soul-eating monster?
Yep.
I mentioned this earlier, but god, this episode looks amazing. The visuals of the asteroids, the sun god in the center, all the aliens, everything looks so, well, alien and cool. The sheer variety of species we see here brings the setting to life. I also love the Doctor nerding out like a kid at a convention, and Clara's just the confused parent who's happy because he's happy. We've already seen how Clara will always look out for others, and especially children, so it's nice when she really takes the time to comfort and encourage Mary, putting all the overwhelming alien stuff aside to help a kid who looked scared. Relating to her while subtly reminding the audience of the importance Clara's mum has to her. There's also the start of the arc of Clara and the TARDIS not getting on, something which persists until being paid off at the end of the series. Clara also sacrifices her mum's ring just to try and save Mary. This last reminder of the mum she lost at 16, and she gives it up without complaining, to save a girl she hardly knows. Alright, time for the big moment. The Doctor's speech. He explains the history of the universe to Mary, and okay, no, but genuinely, this moment is so good. The Doctor explains where Mary and everyone else really came from. He's not doing it to ruin her faith. He tells her this so she knows what she's being sacrificed for. The Doctor was accepting of the religion at first, seeing no issue with people believing in it, since it wasn't doing anyone any harm. But now he knows the dark truth, that these people are having their beliefs taken advantage of, and their souls fed to a parasite claiming to be a god. He shuts it down. He's not shaming Mary or anyone for believing in a religion. He's saving their lives from a false god. The Doctor is always one to highlight the importance and uniqueness of life, and this scene does that in a powerful way that ties into the narrative of coincidence and the importance of so many smaller events.
There is only one Mary Galel. Getting rid of that existence isn't a sacrifice, it is a waste.
Alright, now it's time for the big moments. You knew it was coming. The Doctor decides his only way to defeat Akhaten is to overwhelm it with his own soul. All his memories and emotions and experiences. You know, this scene is actually the first thing to come up when you Google the definition of acting. Okay, not really, but it should be. Matt Smith genuinely gives one of the finest performances of any actor to put their mark on this show, delivering such a powerhouse of emotion. The sheer range on display as he truly conveys the age and experience and weariness of the Doctor in a way few actors probably could, all while the long song plays. All the people singing along, the lyrics fitting really well with the Doctor's character at this point. This old warrior nearing the end of his life. It's a perfect example of just how much the Doctor keeps it all bottled up, sometimes forgetting just how much guilt and trauma he carries with him. The old man behind the young exterior comes out in full force as he gives his memories to Akhaten. The head hanging at the end hits so hard, almost as if he'd hoped this would relieve him of his pain. This is such a perfect scene, it never fails to make me cry. But it wasn't enough. Not even the ageless wisdom of the Doctor could stop Akhaten. Clara realizes the only way to stop it is to feed it with an unlimited amount of futures that never happened, giving it the leaf that started it all. I don't care if people think this is stupid, it makes sense within the narrative. The whole episode has been about sentimentality, uniqueness, and coincidence. Doctor Who has done alternate timelines before, simple decisions having a massive impact on the universe, and this isn't really any different. The leaf perfectly highlights all the futures that could have been, all the days that never came, and it's a brilliantly sentimental ending. So yeah, The Rings of Akhaten is a criminally underrated episode. I will defend and praise it until the day I die. The emotional value, the uniqueness of it all, the storytelling, the music, the design, everything is just so good, creating something so very Doctor Who. At this point, we're nearly at the end of the 11th Doctor era. Only a few episodes remain. The Trilogy of the Doctor, all leading up to whatever awaits him on Trenzalore. The trilogy starts with The Name of the Doctor, which I definitely consider the weakest of the three specials by a significant margin. Something I really like about this episode is how depressing it is. The episode really drives home how massive it all is, as if the Doctor's death is finally approaching. The Doctor spends pretty much the whole episode deadly serious, the youthful facade completely gone as he's reminded of his imminent death, fully breaking down as soon as he realizes the prophecy has caught up to him. There's also the TARDIS refusing to land on Trenzalore, all this showing just how big this really is. But the Doctor is willing to do it, to visit his own grave, all because of his friends who he needs to save. Those same friends who were there for him at his lowest, who supported him and had faith in him for so long. This all starts because of some criminal in Victorian London who knows the location of the Doctor's grave and bargains for his life with Madame Vastra. But how did he get those coordinates, you may ask? The Whispermen gave them to him to give to Vastra, even though they visit Vastra and Jenny anyway. And this information is consigned to a random minisode. So the Whispermen are basically the henchmen of the Great Intelligence, and I'm sorry, but you will never be the trickster. These guys don't really come off as all that threatening, mainly because they never actually kill anyone. They're just kind of there. We find out Trenzalore was the place of a battleground, where the Doctor finally dies, the planet torn to shreds and flooded with gravestones. It's a very haunting image, and not the end you'd expect for the heroic and pacifist Doctor. The TARDIS becoming massive, like a giant monument to the fallen hero, is such a cool visual. Apart from all that though, not much really happens, and it's not like this episode is a big character study or anything. It's just the Great Intelligence goes into the Doctor's timeline and undoes all his victories, which he can do, I guess.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Then Clara goes in and undoes all of the undoing, which she can also do. Yeah, I don't know, this is weird, but Clara's decision to potentially kill herself to save the Doctor fits with her character, and shows how she's beginning to grow in confidence, something which starts at the end of Series 7 and goes much further in Series 8. Anyway, the Doctor also enters his own time stream and rescues Clara, and they just escape. Somehow, it's never really shown, but not before the Doctor is reminded of his secret, a part of his past he tried very hard to forget. The War Doctor, played by legendary actor John Hurt, the Doctor who fought in the Time War. This is a pretty massive reveal, creating huge intrigue for the 50th anniversary, even if it comes at the cost of the episode actually having an ending. So yeah, Name of the Doctor has some great dark and depressing themes, and it's got Strax in it, but the Great Intelligence doesn't really do much, and it feels like not a lot really happens, generally. Plus, the episode doesn't really have an ending, which is a bit frustrating. Hopefully, the Day of the Doctor can pick up the slack. But first, so 2013 was the year of Doctor Who's 50th anniversary, and we got a few things to mark the occasion. First, you've got the 5-ish Doctors, where the 5th, 6th and 7th Doctors all try and weasel their way into the filming of The Day of the Doctor. It pokes fun at the show and the cast in a light-hearted way, and it is genuinely really funny and worth a watch if you haven't seen it.
I had these ideas. I thought I could appear at the end, and I could save you, and you could all die. I become the Doctor. I'm a Time Lord. Instead of having a sonic screwdriver, I could have boom, they come out my eyes, like sonic.
Why does that unironically sound like something Russell would do now? There was also An Adventure in Space and Time, a sort of documentary biopic kind of thing, all about the beginning of the show, leading up to the end of William Hartnell's tenure. Genuinely really well made, and the ending is so good. Another thing that's absolutely worth a watch. There was also The Night of the Doctor, a minisode which basically explains how the War Doctor came to be, as we finally see the 8th Doctor Paul McGann regenerate, as he finally joins the Time War. According to Stephen Moffat, Paul wasn't included in the main special because he couldn't imagine the 8th Doctor being the one to destroy Gallifrey. It is a shame McGann didn't get to be in the special itself, but at least he got this really good minisode. And thus, we come to the big one. The Day of the Doctor. By the sounds of it, this special was an absolute nightmare to make, and it's a miracle that it all came together. It's also a miracle that it ended up being an absolute banger, but we'll come back to that. Plans for this special had been made as far back as 2011, with script writing beginning in late 2012. Early on in the script writing process, though, it was unclear whether any Doctors would actually be in the episode, due to Matt Smith and David Tennant not being under contract for the series. So, an early draft involved Clara finding a bunch of fictional Doctors in a bunch of films, but being unable to remember who the Doctor is, due to him vanishing from existence after stepping into his own time stream. There was also a plan for the special to end with the revelation that the entire 2005 reboot up until this point was all a dream. Thank f*** this didn't happen. Eventually, though, Matt Smith and David Tennant were confirmed to be in the special, but there was definitely room for one more in that TARDIS. With the BBC vetoing the idea of any classic Doctors being in it, Moffat tried to get 9th Doctor Christopher Eccleston to take part, basically at the beginning of his life, the moment he ended the Time War. There were discussions about Eccleston returning, but he eventually declined, still not quite willing to forgive the BBC for the treatment he received during and after his time on the show, something I bear him no grudge for. It was at this point Moffat thought of including a never-before-seen Doctor, one the character would do anything to forget and erase from his past. For a big upheaval in the lore and the numbering of the Doctors like this, though, you'd need a big name to justify it. And so, legendary actor John Hurt took the role, a choice which was so great and so fitting. John Hurt captures the essence of this old, worn-down Doctor incredibly well, his gruff, tattered exterior really selling that this is a man beaten down by an endless war. The special also brings back Billie Piper, but not as Rose, instead as The Moment, a sentient piece of Time Lord technology taking the form of the Bad Wolf entity. The special also incorporated 3D into the cinema screenings. Yeah, remember when 3D was being hyped up as this big new thing? Me neither. The Day of the Doctor came just towards the end of the whole 3D craze, but actually uses it in a clever way, making 3D part of the story with the Gallifrey Falls painting. The episode makes it clear from the start that it's a love letter that will honour the 50 years that have led us here, starting with the original 1963 title sequence, as well as a recreation of the very first shot from the first episode, An Unearthly Child. Oh, come on! Oh, also, Clara is a teacher now. I mean, we've seen her willingness to look after kids, so this is a pretty natural next step. Also, apparently Ian Chesterton still works at Coal Hill, so maybe the Doctor put in a word for her. I love how cinematic this opening is, the Doctor hanging off the TARDIS. It fits with Unit's track record of rushing into action, all guns blazing, and also just makes for a really hype opening. The episode really bombards you with a lot, setting up the three main Doctors and how their stories will intertwine. It's also here we finally get a proper look at the Time War. The entire show up until this point had built the war up as this unimaginable, hellish conflict. So many phrases and names being mentioned with no context to leave it to the viewer's imagination as to what the war really looked like. Showing the actual war was definitely a risk, but the episode handles it well. This is the very end of the Time War, when both sides had used all their main weapons and ideas, and the conflict had devolved into more or less a typical war. There are also a couple of references to the end of time, the 10th Doctor's final episode here.
The High Council is in emergency session. They have plans of their own.
To hell with the High Council. Their plans have already failed.
He still possesses the moment, and he'll use it to destroy Daleks and Time Lords alike.
I love how Moffat got this one random line and turned it into an actual plot point, making the moment into a real thing. The moment follows the War Doctor, guiding him through his future to try and encourage him not to destroy Gallifrey, like the three ghosts from A Christmas Carol all at once. And on that note, this trilogy sorta carries a similar theme to A Christmas Carol. You know, Name of the Doctor is about the Doctor's past catching up with him, Day of the Doctor is about the present, who he is now, and Time of the Doctor is about the future, the Doctor growing old and seeing what lies ahead. There's also the 10th Doctor casually getting engaged to Queen Elizabeth I. As you do. The whole marrying Queen Elizabeth thing is also a reference to the end of time.
Got married! That was a mistake. Good Queen Bess. And let me tell you, her nickname is no longer...
David Tennant just slips back into the role as if he'd never left, and he's awesome. It's always a treat to get the 10th Doctor with Stephen Moffat's writing. Also, a lot of people complain about his hair being flat here. He couldn't make it spiky due to him growing it out for his upcoming role as Richard II in the eponymous Shakespeare play. But it's not as if his hair was never flat before. Remember The Runaway Bride? Now, the main thing you look for in a multi-Doctor story is the Doctor interacting with themselves. That's the main hook of these types of episodes. Isn't that right, the two Doctors? And yeah, the Doctors' interactions with themselves are absolutely golden. 10 and 11 having such great chemistry, akin to 2 and 3 in The Three Doctors. The War Doctor is also similar to the first Doctor in that episode, shocked and disturbed about the childish goofballs he's about to become. And this makes sense, since Stephen Moffat did originally want the first Doctor in this special, but didn't actually get to do this until Twice Upon a Time, where the first Doctor is similarly shocked at the 12th Doctor's childishness. The War Doctor basically represents the classic Doctors, calling out 10 and 11's over-reliance on the sonic screwdriver and the increase in romance and kissing that started in the modern show.
Screwdrivers, what are you going to do? Assemble a cabinet at them?
The War Doctor represents the serious side of the New Who Doctors, the grizzled old man they all try so hard to push down and forget. 10 and 11 now confronted with the version of themselves they can't bear to look at. Someone they don't even consider the same person, which is very apt given the main villains of the episode. The Doctors don't just have an outwitting competition with each other, they have genuine conflict. Like in that really powerful scene where 10 calls out 11 for not wanting to remember how many children there were on Gallifrey the day he entered the Time War. It's not that 11 doesn't care, of course he does. But a lot of time has passed. Those feelings are less raw now, and the 11th Doctor is the man who forgets, always wanting to move on and live in the moment.
The day you killed them all.
The day we killed them all.
Same thing.
Whereas the 10th Doctor is still stricken with grief and regret, especially at this point in his life. But the 11th Doctor's insistence on moving on has made him lose part of his identity, as he sometimes forgets who he is, what the name of the Doctor really means. And that comes back later in this episode. The main villains of this episode are the Zygons, one-off villains from the early 4th Doctor era, who definitely had a level of longevity in the fandom despite only appearing once. The Zygons are what link the 10th and 11th Doctor's adventures up. They're both investigating the same evil plan, just centuries apart, as the Zygons play Mario 64 IRL and hide in paintings. But UNIT decides to neutralize the problem by blowing up the Black Archive, destroying the whole of London in the process. Seems reasonable. Oh boy, killing a large amount of people to save an even larger amount? I sure do wonder what this is a parallel to. Jokes aside, this scene perfectly encapsulates what the Doctor is about after the Time War. Finding a better way, sticking to their promise, and never giving up. something which comes back in full force the next time the Doctor enters the Black Archive. But just as the War Doctor decides to go back to the barn on Gallifrey, ready to use the moment with the knowledge that his future is in safe hands, the other two show up, having also gained respect for him, to the point where they choose to do the kind of thing and not leave him to make the decision alone. But they all reflect on what it means to be the Doctor, the promise they made to always find a better way. The Doctor spent all that time forgetting this incarnation, dismissing him as an evil warrior who didn't deserve the title of the Doctor. But the fact is, this is still the Doctor. He was faced with the most impossible decision, with every option he had resulting in genocide, and he still chose the better option, killing his entire race, billions of people, for the sake of the universe. But now they're together, they can find an even better way. There was a moment earlier in this episode where the three of them realize they can leave a sonic calculation going for centuries in order to disintegrate a door. It was played for a joke, but this plot point comes back as they realize they can spend their whole life calculating a way to freeze Gallifrey in an alternate universe, resulting in a triumphant moment as all the Doctors, including the incoming 12th Doctor, come together to end the Time War, pacifist mode, because that's who the Doctor is. They'll always try and find another way to keep people alive no matter the cost. That's the name of the Doctor. This doesn't erase or devalue the Doctor's arcs or struggles over the last 7 series. All that guilt and trauma wasn't magically undone by this. The Doctor won't remember that they saved Gallifrey, instead assuming they burned it. Nothing has been undone or contradicted. We've just found out more about what actually happened that day. The 10th Doctor retains his final words of, "I don't want to go." And the War Doctor regenerates. His story is done. But there's still one final surprise.
I could retire and be the curator of this place.
You know, I really think you might.
Tom Baker makes an appearance as a retired Doctor from the far future.
In years to come, you might find yourself revisiting a few, but just the old favorites, eh?
I guess he was right. Now, if you could just regenerate into Paul McGann again? And the curator tells the Doctor that Gallifrey survived, in a very optimistic end to the story. Tom Baker bringing that same charisma and charm that made him so iconic back in the day. It's such a great ending. The Day of the Doctor had a lot to live up to. Expectations were extremely high for a special which did justice to 50 years of the show, and I think what we got was absolutely satisfying. I know a lot of people say it's mainly a New Who celebration, but if you ask me, it makes up for all those classic Who anniversary specials that didn't acknowledge New Who. How inconsiderate of them. No, but genuinely, I like that this special isn't overly referential to the past. The Power of the Doctor and the latest series of the show, despite being things I enjoy, are pretty good examples of why an over-reliance on the past can come off as a bit cheesy. The Day of the Doctor honours the history of the show while still telling its own new story, bringing the narrative of the last 7 years to an end as the show moves forward into new territory. And with that, we enter the final episode. The Time of the Doctor. Matt Smith's swan song of the character he brought to life for nearly 4 years. It was this episode's job to conclude all the arcs of this era, set up where the show is going next, and deliver a satisfying ending to this period of the show. What we got was a brilliantly emotional episode that really ends the era on a high. I genuinely have such a soft spot for this episode, and I'm literally unable to watch it without collapsing into a sobbing mess. So with that in mind, let's get into the finale. The episode starts with a message, an eerie sound that echoes across the entire universe. A sound so eerie and mysterious that everyone has gathered to find out what it is. Even massive warrior races like the Daleks have shown up. Not to fight anyone, yet, but out of fear. We see this through the Doctor hopping between different spaceships and getting into trouble every time, which is funny on its own, but also shows the scale of this event. How all these violent races have put their tendencies aside because of whatever is coming from that planet. All this is immediately contrasted with Clara's sitcom-like scenario of pretending she has a boyfriend. It's good to get all the light-hearted comedy out there first, that way the soul-crushing reality of the rest of the episodes will be even more depressing. There's also the Church of the Papal Mainframe, which you have to be naked to attend for some reason. I don't know, this doesn't really have an effect on the plot, it's just kinda there for the giggles, I guess. I do think a lot of people misinterpret this scene though.
Why don't I project my closed hologram onto their visual cortexes too?
I don't think he greeted Clara's family while naked because he thought it was acceptable. I think he just forgot to project his clothes onto them too. Also, Clara's dad looks completely different. Sure, as the Doctor and Clara arrive on the planet, they're attacked by weeping angels. The angels only have a couple of cameos in this episode, which I think is when they're at their best, since they are pretty simple villains. The scene is very tense, and is just a fraction of the universe-ending danger that looms just above the planet. The town of Christmas seems so quaint and nice, full of regular people, but the whole vibe completely shifts as soon as the Doctor discovers the crack once again, with the realization that the message is coming from the Time Lords, calling through from whatever universe they ended up in.
Seal of the High Council of Gallifrey nicked it off the Master in the Death Zone.
That is such a sudden random reference, but I love it.
I'll return it at the first opportunity.
Or not, I guess. The plan for the 11th Doctor was always to have his first episode link with his last, with all the narratives and arcs coming together in the end. We had the cracks, the silence, River Song, all that stuff had been gradually building up throughout series 5 and 6, and this is where the payoff happens.
The Kavarian chapter broke away. They traveled back along your timeline and tried to prevent you ever reaching Trenzalore.
Yeah, that line right there, that is the payoff for the entire narratives of series 5 and 6. That's how it all concludes. Yeah, I've had to explain the whole narrative of the 11th Doctor era to a lot of people in the past, as it is pretty convoluted and does kinda suffer from rushed conclusions like this. So if you don't fully get the whole story, here's a summary. The Time Lords are trying to re-enter the universe after all the Doctors sealed Gallifrey away in the Day of the Doctor. They used the crack caused by the Doctor's TARDIS blowing up to try and get through, as that's the weakest point in the universe. The Doctor stopped the explosion back in the Big Bang, but the crack remained as scar tissue, and so that's what they use, asking for the Doctor's real name as proof that they found the correct and safe place to enter, using a truth field to make sure he doesn't lie. But if the Time Lords come through, all the aliens parked above the planet will descend, and the Time War will begin again. That future we saw of Trenzalore being set in stone. The Church of the Papal Mainframe devote themselves to the Doctor's silence, but the Kavarian chapter breaks free, and they travel back in time to prevent the Doctor from reaching Trenzalore. They kidnap Amy and Rory's baby and turn her into a weapon to kill him, and they blow his TARDIS up, which then creates the very cracks the Time Lords are now using. Make sense? Okay, great, let's move on. Okay, no, once again, it is important to mention the context of this special. The original plan was that the plot of this episode would stretch out across a whole series, as Moffat thought Matt Smith was staying into Series 8. But then it was revealed Smith was leaving at the end of Series 7, and so this whole idea for a series had to be condensed into one special, due to Moffat wanting to give Capaldi a clean slate. This is why some things do feel kinda rushed and unresolved. A bit of a recurring trope in the Smith era, unfortunately. And while it does really suck that we never got a full series out of this, as I think that would have been awesome, I'm glad this finale ended up being as coherent and enjoyable as it is. This really nice planet is actually Trenzalore, before it became that war-torn wasteland we saw in Name of the Doctor. This adds so much weight to the planet and the people on it, as we know what becomes of them in the future. Even the word Trenzalore carries so much meaning, so the name drop here really makes it clear that this is where the Doctor's story ends. He even sends Clara back home, just like with Rose in Series 1, when he was also sure he was going to die. We've seen how this Doctor will just never let his friends go, so for him to send Clara home just like that sells how hopeless he knows this situation is. Also, Moffat seemingly had a thing for ending his Doctor's tenures with a futile war they know they can't win. Oh yeah, there's also the reveal that the Doctor's biggest fear in the God Complex was the crack. I don't really like that. I think it should have remained unanswered, but whatever. And so, the Doctor stays to protect the people of Christmas. He's on his final regeneration at this point, and even though he loves travelling and would want to make the most of his final life, he puts it all aside and grows old protecting this one small village. Because that's who the Doctor is. And I don't know, man, I try not to let nostalgia bias get in the way of how I review and analyse this show, but it is really hard for this episode in particular. Capaldi may be my favourite, but Matt Smith is my Doctor. The one I grew up with, the reason I fell in love with the show. And there's just something so melancholic about seeing him grow old before our eyes that just perfectly reflects how quickly time flies without you even realizing. It's pretty much at this point I start becoming an emotional mess, something which persists for the rest of the episode. He'll gladly spend the final years of his life defending one small town, because the alternative is the town burning. He's seen the future that awaits if he helps bring the Time Lords back. And as someone who's seen his own planet ravaged by war, he doesn't want to let it happen to another. He knows the war is inevitable, but puts it off as long as he can to give the townspeople hope.
Are you coming back?
You know me.
I'll wait.
Moffat, I swear to God. Also, the Doctor has one constant companion while stuck here. Handles, the Cyberman head, who has a genuinely emotional death. It gets to a point where only the Daleks remain. It makes sense they'd be the most determined to stop the Time Lords from returning. The Time War was between those two races, after all. The war cost countless Daleks, resulting in them becoming scavengers desperate for survival, so it makes sense they'd do anything to prevent that from happening again. The Doctor and the Silence also stand as allies, an interesting contrast to their rivalry in Series 6, showing how massive and endless this conflict is. Eventually, the Doctor is an old man, resembling the first Doctor. His home covered with drawings made by kids who will have died centuries ago. The town under attack by Daleks, and the Doctor old and dying, too weak to even pull a Christmas cracker. This scene is genuinely heartbreaking. The Doctor knowing his time is up, but happy he got to see his best friend one last time. The Doctor accepts this is the end, but Clara makes one last plea to the Time Lords, explaining what we, the audience, learn from him. He's the Doctor, and that's all he ever needs to be. He stuck to his promise to the end, never gave up, was never cruel or cowardly, and inspired others to never give up and fight for good in his name. Surely that is earning of respect. And as it turns out, it is. The Time Lords grant him a new regeneration cycle, and it's incredible how quickly the mood completely changes. The tired, defeated old Doctor suddenly energetic and heroic once again. Literally 30 seconds ago, he said,
If you want something done, do it yourself.
The Doctor does often seem weary and tired of living while everyone else dies, but he is genuinely happy at being able to live on for this one shining moment. Matt Smith's range in this scene is incredible, showing off his skills in one last epic scene before the end. The clock striking 12 as he defeats the Daleks with his immortality. And so, with the future of war prevented, the Doctor can leave. I think you probably know what I think of this scene. God, I am always an emotional wreck watching this. It's easily my favourite regeneration scene. The Doctor's speech about accepting change, the bittersweetness of his acceptance and sadness. I vividly remember watching this as it aired, seeing the Doctor young again and hoping with all my heart he was going to stay that way. And him relating his regeneration to how we all change as people is so powerful. He sees Amy one last time. He started out as her imaginary friend, and in the end, she was his. All while the long song plays, the ancient warrior can finally rest. He stopped the siege of Trenzalore, he saved the universe, he saved Gallifrey. His story is done. He simultaneously rips off his bow tie, and rips my heart in two, and finally regenerates. The 11th Doctor's story is over. The clock is striking 12.
And what you've got to ask is, what happened to them? Hello, Stonehenge!
Okay then, that's what I'll do. I will tell you a story.
Who takes the Pandorica takes the universe. Not monsters, not evil. I mean, well, only as evil as you are.
It all just disappears, doesn't it? Everything you are, gone in a moment, like breath on a mirror.
Goodbye, Nebworth. Hello, everything. I am and always will be the optimist, the hoper of far-flung hopes and dreamer of improbable dreams. I've defeated you time and time again. I've defeated you.
All these people who lived in terror of you and your judgment.
You just raised an army against yourself.
Good men don't need rules. Today is not the day to find out why I have so many.
Tis the Masters, the Daleks, all the people who died because of my mercy. Well, it has never laid a glove on me.
I'm not running away from things, I am running to them.
We can land this together if you are the best you can be.
Salvage of a lifetime. You meant the ship. I meant Clara. Whatever happens now, you do not interfere.
Fear me. I've killed hundreds of Time Lords.
Fear me. I've killed all of them.
He's the one who broke the promise. Because the alternative is burning.
And I've seen that.
And I never want to see it again.
Trenzalore, where I'm buried.
To you, I haven't been born yet. And to you, I've been dead 100 billion years.
I should have known you better. Do you know, in 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before. And you are forgiven, always and completely forgiven, because what's the point in them being happy now if they're going to be sad later? What the hell are you doing? The answer is, of course, because they are going to be sad later. Or maybe there's a bigger, scarier adventure waiting for you in there.
This is the day everything begins.
And every single one of them, at some point in their lives, will look back at this man taking that very first step, and they will never, ever forget. Amy Williams, it's time to stop waiting.
You have it all!
Because you were the first.
Never tell me the rules!
My time is running out. One last victory. Allow me that. Our whole story's in the end. I will always remember when the Doctor was me. Hello. I'm the Doctor.
I really like the Matt Smith era of Doctor Who. Stephen Moffat continues the show in such a perfect way, honouring what came before while not being afraid to try new things and push the boundaries of the show in new and interesting ways. While the era may suffer with a middling final series and lackluster conclusions due to time constraints, it more than makes up for it with unique and gripping stories, engaging characters and performances, and, in my opinion, the most emotionally impactful period of the show, comprised of so many iconic episodes and a phenomenal ending to the 11th Doctor's tenure. Matt Smith is an incredible actor who really gave his all to this show, creating a definitive version of the Doctor that defined a generation. And you can tell he loved his time in the role. Even now, he's one of the main characters in House of the Dragon, one of the biggest shows at the minute, but he's always happy to talk about Doctor Who in every interview, and his love and dedication to the part are such an inspiration. In case you can't tell, Stephen Moffat is easily my favourite Doctor Who showrunner. Big surprise, I know. I love the original RTD era, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the Moffat era did more with the overall uniqueness of Doctor Who as a show, creating more complex, timey-wimey sci-fi narratives that truly feel like they could only work in this silly blue box show. Be it the convoluted, bittersweet narratives of the 11th Doctor era, or the mature character studies of the 12th Doctor era. I adore this period of the show, and I'm so glad the fandom consensus on the Moffat era has changed so much in recent years. I know some people are just going to call me nostalgia blind, and maybe you're right. But I'm sure there are at least some people out there who will agree with me, and will appreciate this being said. So if you're an 11th Doctor fan, or even if you're not, I hope you enjoyed this video if you somehow watched it all the way. If you found a new appreciation for the 11th Doctor due to this video, welcome to the 300 IQ Club. But yeah, thanks for the support, Merry Christmas, assuming I do manage to upload this before Christmas, and remember, the angel is full of forests.